So in recording this, and not that it will stop me, or that I guess I care very much, or I would have run my career such as it is differently. But do you think that talking to you about this and putting this out is going to put me on some of the same blacklists that you're on?
I do not. I don't think. I think that that what I deal with now more than anything is the stigma, and I believe that the reputation that was laid back in the '90s by all of them, Leonardo DiCaprio, Tobey Macguire, Kevin Connolly, Scott Bloom, and others, including guys like Jay Ferguson and more. These guys, put a reputation out there. They destroyed my reputation, and that follows me around. But I don't think that there's any activity out there. And no, not at all. I think that I don't even think if you took a stance, took a side, you're like, bad Leo, bad Tobey. I don't think it would have any effect at all on you or really anyone near you.
Well, I
So
think, I mean,
that,
hating on famous people is too easy. No,
yeah, yeah,
I have a side. I am on the side of this film. Like
yeah, exactly.
the film is innocent. The film exists, and
It is.
there are, if there was only, if there were only half or one tenth as many important frames in it, it would still be an important part of the historical record. And
Let me,
yeah,
yeah, let me just say this. Let me just say this, okay? Because this is what I deal with. This is like what that question is the epitome of my problem,
yeah,
right?
I bet.
Like this is, yeah, it is. Like people are, I've lived with this, with this, with people telling me over and over again. I've lived with people telling me over and over again, Dale, you gotta move on. You gotta make another film. I can't even tell you how many of the hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of times over the last 20 years that I've heard the words or read the words. You got to make another film. Make another film. It's just one film. Like people do not understand that every film is a trip to the summit of Everest. They just don't. And it doesn't matter how small. It does not matter how small. Films are gigantic undertakings, and feature films in particular. And moving on would be great, and making other films would be great, right? It would really be wonderful. But I literally deal with, there was this guy. I'll give you an example. A guy in Jersey. He said, "Man, let's make a small movie, not a short film, it's just a small movie." I was like, "Yeah, I want to make something small, 100 grand, 100 grand, 150 grand, perfect." I was like, "This is a great little budget." I started writing and coming up with ideas of how I could take $150,000 and put the right cast together and come out with something really special. And I started putting it all together, and then this guy comes, he was like, "Hey man, I'm going to go in a different direction." And I was like, "Why?" And he was decent enough to be honest with me, dude. He was like, "Well, because I don't know if working with you was going to hurt me." And you ask a question like, is talking to you a possibility? Does that possibly make me a target for the blacklist that you now live with? And this is what living with a blacklist is.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I get in the room, man, and the air is spoiled, And so here I sit with a shelf full of scripts unrealized, with a heart full of poems, with a head full of movies. I can't get any of it out. And part of why I can't get it out is because even if Leonardo DiCaprio doesn't actively try to destroy my name or my reputation, which he does passively, by the way, when he gets the chance and he can do it, he will. I know this. I've actually got evidence. But even if he wasn't like that, he didn't do that until Leonardo DiCaprio said publicly, emphatically, Don's Plum's my film, film I'm in. I love it. Go see it. And all is forgotten. And I think even if he did that, there would still be, that 20% of crazies out there who would just stick to this idea or this belief that we're bad people and that we did bad things. But otherwise, this stigma, unless Leo lifts the stigma goes nowhere. There's only one possibility for me, I believe. I truly believe that there's only one real possibility for me. And I'm working toward it. And that is that I get the public. I don't need all the public, and I don't need Leo's public. I just need enough human beings who believed in Don's Plum enough to say, I want to see what this filmmaker can do next. That's what the only hope for me ever. There's never going to be an independent financier who's going to step behind me with the kind of money that a film requires and feel comfortable doing it, knowing that I have the biggest star in the world ready to slice me open in public at any attempt, or to stop the film. Right? This is the big thing, right? They'd be afraid that they'd be able to stop the film. Do I think Leonardo DiCaprio would interfere with my next film? I don't. Do I think Leonardo DiCaprio would be mad at you or try to interfere or put you on some blacklist because you took the time to interview me and talk about the film and give me a platform, or give the film a platform? I absolutely do not. But that is not going to stop people from thinking that he will, and that is what's going to stop people from working with me.
Well, that's what makes me I'm so happy I asked that, because first of all, blacklists to one degree or another affect many of the films that we discuss on this podcast. And the dynamic of being inside one and of recognizing that dynamic is, I think it's just an important thing. And it's hard to recognize when it's not happening to you. But let me just say, and just take me by my actions, not by my words. If this podcast ultimately comes out, which of course it is, or it will, then please feel like that's me putting my sort of Dalton Trumbo arm around you and saying, okay, while there's still a blacklist around you, I got my arm around you creatively. I don't know. We don't know each other that well, but I was raised on blacklists are bad, So
blacklists are bad.
Yeah.
Hey man, I'll tell you, and you're recording, so you can have this. It's a tool, but if not, just a tidbit. Like, it's so crazy how deeply this permeates. And, when I came out with Free Dawn's Plum, and you're a positive guy with this positive vibe, and I was doing a positive thing, by getting out there and being like, hey man, I'm going to confront this thing that drags around behind me, making noise, changing everything from me. I'm just going to turn around. I'm going to face it. I'm going to talk about it. And I wrote that open letter, and obviously it was a very positive step forward. But shit, I just forgot what I was about to say. Damn it. Never mind.
That's okay.
It slipped away like a fucking fish in the night.
You know what? The thing about it, those fish just kind of stay in the same area. So my experience is, you let them come to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I'm sorry to have distracted that away, but anyway, that was a great question. It's an important question. I don't think I get frankly that I've been asked enough about it. Like,
well, I think most people won't be.
This is what I was going to tell you. This is what I do recall I was going to tell you now. So I came out with Free Dawn's Plum, and that kind of blew up a little bit. And actually, before it blew up, I wrote the open letter to Leonardo DiCaprio in September 2014. Shortly after that, I reached out to a writer called Nancy Jo Sales. Nancy Jo Sales coined the phrase, or made at least popular the phrase, pussy posse, in a New York Magazine article in the 90s talking about Leo and his crew, right? In the late 90s, and this was after our fallout, and she mentions Dawn's Plum in it, and this is how I'm aware of her in that article. And so I reached out to her because I was like looking, I had no publicist, and I wrote this letter, and I was like, can somebody, do a shout out for me and get somebody to read this letter? And so I reached out to her, tracked her down, sent her an email. Maybe I told you the story. Did I already tell you the story?
No.
About Nancy Jo Sales?
No. Okay.
So then I wrote her, I found her email. I wrote her, said, hey, Nancy Jo Sales, you wrote this article. I wrote this open letter on the writer producer of Dawn's Plum, and I've got, this is my plight. And she wrote back. She was at the time, and may still be, a writer at Vanity Fair at that. So she had moved on from New York Magazine onto Vanity Fair, which I did not know, or I may have known at that time. Actually, I may have tracked her down there. But anyway, I reached out to her. She responded, and she said, Dale, no one is going to touch this. No one's going to touch this. No one's going to publish articles. Certainly Vanity Fair won't, but most won't. And she gave me a whole explanation, she in writing. It was amazing. She broke down or she surmised at least how people are going to or why people are going to reject my story, and why Vanity Fair will reject my story. And it was just like a fascinating letter. And so then, whatever, 3 years later, I get an email from a writer from Vanity Fair, and they're like, "Hey, I want to write about Freedom's Plum." And I was like, "Okay, well, let's do it." So I do the interviews, a couple of interviews, maybe 3-4 hours worth of interviews. We do the interviews. Months pass. I'm getting all this great feedback from the writer. Graydon, whatever his name was, he was the media giant at the time, running Vanity Fair. Loves the article, loves the interview. Everything's amazing. I have not read anything. It's all exciting. I'm getting calls like it's going to move to the magazine and just all this great stuff. And then time goes by, and they're like, "Oh, we're doing a relaunch of our website, and so we're going to use this as the flagship, sort of, or the relaunch article for the new website." I'm like, "Oh, that's exciting. Let's do that." Or you go ahead and do that, or whatever. And finally, the article comes out, and I read it, and the article is fucked. It's just nothing like the interview that I thought I had. And it certainly didn't tell the story that I believed was not only the truth, but the story that needed to be told, and the story I tried to convey to the writer. And he wrote me, and he asked me after the article came out, he wrote me and he said, "Hey man, I know the article came out. What do you think?" Because he was nervous of how I felt about it. And I responded to him by saying that he embarrassed me. I said, "This is an embarrassment. This is nothing like we talked about." And I sent that email off, and he sent it back to me. He responded to that email, and I did not look at it. I did not open it. For 2 years, I did not open this email because I just was so angry at the article itself that I just didn't bother. Well, then I get approached by the New York Post, right, to do the documentary. So I get approached by the New York Post, and I tell the guy when he approaches me, I'm like, "You're going to get interfered with. You're going to get blocked. Forget about this, all this other stuff." This is sort of how the thing starts with the New York Post guy. And then I'm like, "Look, I just went through the shit with Vanity Fair." So just at that point, for whatever reason, I decided, my curiosity kicked in, and I went to go read what the response to the fair writer to my email. And so 2 years later, I open it up, and what is he details the interference of Leonardo DiCaprio in the article. Like literally details how Leo, first of all, how Graydon wanted Leo at the Oscar party, and that's why they weren't going to do anything at his Oscar party. So that's why they weren't going to do anything on Freedom's Plum. But then he detailed how Leo's publicist literally interfered with the article and the sum and substance of the article. Isn't that nuts?
We're here to tell you how the world is wrong. The world is wrong about Tom's Plum.
Yeah. Welcome to The World is Wrong, an extremely positive podcast where we celebrate films and film artists the world is wrong about. I am one of your hosts, and my name is Andras Jones.
And my name is Brian Connolly, and I'm also one of the hosts.
And we're here to talk about Don's Plum, and you already heard a chunk of the interview that I conducted with Dale Wheatley, who's a writer and producer on this film. So you kind of got a little bit of the backstory of what this is. Brian, do you have any response to this whole thing, that we might be on a blacklist because of this podcast?
I don't think we will, but you know what? It's good to stand up for people who get their art taken away. I think that's a good person to defend in this world. I believe that censorship is a bad thing. And so I think that if you made something, people should see it, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not. It's just something out in the world. You just got to put it out there. But this is a movie I had never heard of. It definitely worked in them not having this movie come out because I never heard of it. I heard of the people who were in this movie, but until you wanted to do this episode, I had never heard of this movie at all. And I think maybe part of it was because it's listed on IMDb as being made in like 2001 or something like that. And so I assumed it was some weird movie made between these people's big movies. I didn't realize it was like early on in one of their first movies when it was actually made. It just, that was the year that it actually came out in Europe or whatever, I think. But no, this is definitely a fascinating experience, this movie. Whether it works for you or not, I feel it's worth watching because it's just an interesting time capsule and just an interesting moment in these people's lives, in these characters' lives, in these actors' lives, and it's definitely worth seeking it out.
Well, I want to put a little teaser here. At the end of my conversation with Dale Wheatley, we're going to come back and we're going to get your take on this film.
Great.
So you should stick around for that. But before that, we're going to go to this. Actually, we're going to go to a clip, and then we're going to go to this talk with Dale Wheatley, and then we're going to come back and try and make sense of all of it, because this is a really, it's a complicated story involving people that many of us think we know, and that is a great jumping off point to what I think is a pretty good talk.
There might be spoilers. There might be spoilers. There might be spoilers.
Hello? Bro, you need to send her back to sea, bro. That chick is fat.
Assholes are everywhere. And there's more of them every fucking day. We breed them like flies.
You guys are such assholes.
How can they be like
What gives you the right to say that
Bro,
about
she's
anybody?
like fucking a little tank walking by, bro.
God, you guys are such
What is
dicks.
the matter?
Fuck
You know,
you,
what
relax.
right do you have to say that about anybody?
Okay,
Shut
Mother
up.
Teresa, Jesus Christ.
Relax,
Well,
you
how would
fucking
you feel?
paranoid
How would you
freak.
feel if I said that about you? You know, you guys aren't so fucking good
How about I take
yourselves.
my shoe and shove it in your mouth, okay?
Oh, I'm sure you just want to fuck me. That's what it's all about. You want to fuck anything that stands
yeah.
still.
You fucking squatty piece of shit hippie cunt.
I'm not even gonna say it. I'm not even gonna say
I know,
it.
'cause
I'm
you
not
don't
gonna
have anything
sing
to
to
say.
your level.
Take those little fucking rubber bands out of your hair.
I'm
and
not
fucking
gonna
get
sing
a
to your level.
haircut.
I'm
Take
not
that
gonna.
stupid flannel. We're fucking biatch.
That's a little much, man.
I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
why don't you just relax?
I know, I don't know any of you guys.
No,
Getting to know each other.
No real harm was done. She didn't hear.
She was fat. It was funny. I say, wow, I find you attractive. Why do I find you attractive? Because you're an asshole. And that must mean that I'm an asshole as well. But
Stop looking at me like that. I'll fucking throw a bottle at your face, you goddamn whore.
You look like you're fucking possessed, bro. Relax.
I know.
What am I supposed to do, bro?
Put your arm around her or something.
She's not my fucking girlfriend. I put my arm around her, bro.
why don't you sit with us?
I can't.
Sit down. Just sit. Come sit for a
Sit
minute.
with us.
Guys, this
Relax.
is my friend Constance.
Relax.
Hey, sit with us.
How are you?
Hey,
Constance. What's up?
I just met this guy, by the way.
Hey, I just met this guy.
What's up, dude? What's up? How you doing, bro?
There's no point, really.
You're not even a fan of the Grateful Dead, are you?
Why are you saying? You have obviously you have nowhere else to go. Is that it? Because you're doing nothing but fucking making everybody like miserable.
She's one of those chicks that lives in like a Volkswagen van and goes
Oh,
each being
you know what?
noble.
Shut up. What do you know about that anyway?
Oh, are you into that kind of shit too?
Whatever.
You guys are so insensitive. Look at she's crying here at the table. It's
Okay,
so
look.
uncool.
Really deep down inside, they don't care about you. And they don't care about themselves.
Well, you just want to alienate yourself? You're such a schmuck.
Myself, I think you're the one that's alienated. if
No,
I'm not
you're the
correct.
one with the problem.
Hi, I'm Constance.
This is
Hi,
my
Constance.
How you doing?
friend.
I'm Derek. This is a whore, and these are the rest
She's
of
a
my
bastard.
friends.
This is past ridiculous.
Oh my
Have you guys had sex with a hooker?
I haven't had sex with her, but I got head from a hooker.
Have you really?
I did, bro.
It was
Since
pretty
we're coming
sick,
clean, I mean, it's obvious I'm not gonna get laid tonight anyway, so I'll tell the story. I was.
You fucking wish.
No, me and my friend Pete Picatagio. We were, I was in 11th grade and we fucking drove in. I got head from a hooker, I'm not gonna lie. $20.
Don't lie.
Right on.
They make you wear a condom.
I know they don't like tell
How
you.
is head with a condom? You guys are so disgusting. You guys think this is funny? You think it's funny talking about degrading other people? You think it's funny to degrade other
She
people?
took the $20.
Go! I can't look at your face anymore. I'm gonna throw something at you. I swear to God.
Scene, bro, please.
Leave!
That's something
Bro,
about
why
it.
don't
Why
you
don't you
guys
guys fucking
die?
leave her alone, bro? You guys were fucking pricks. Why don't you just
Alright.
let her fucking be?
You know?
I just can't look at her anymore. I mean,
Well,
look
then
at
don't
her eyes.
fucking look at her. Stop, bro.
She's looking at me right now. What am I supposed to do? Throw a fucking bottle in her
You're
face?
acting
to
like
stop?
you're fucking 14.
You do this to make yourself feel better because you're scared of me. I'm the one that fucking intimidates you.
Yeah, he does appear to be sharing.
Maybe you should go. I mean, I'm not trying to add to you.
I agree.
Chaos
I don't think
here,
they're
but
gonna
maybe you
stop.
should go. I don't think they're gonna stop.
You guys are such fucking assholes.
All right, but don't,
Get
okay, relax. Don't fucking touch me. Get the fuck out. Hitchhike.
Hey.
Hitchhike from fucking nowhere.
I
stupid
was a
bitch.
little bit of an asshole.
Nonsense, Derek. Nonsense. Doesn't matter. You're cynical.
Well, I have to say that. But
You're a cop,
you should go
bro.
after I really didn't like that guy.
I fucking believe this shit.
I chuckled briefly.
I know.
Kill herself for all you know.
That
I'd
was
kill
out of
them.
hand.
Where did you pick that girl
Yeah,
up?
it'll be all.
You should go
Dude,
after
if
her.
she killed herself, we would
Oh my
Oh,
god.
here comes the big dramatic exit. Oh, wow, big dramatic exit.
Get out of here, you slut, bitch!
You're such a fucking asshole. Hey, watch
Okay, we'll come now.
How ironic is that she threw a Birkenstock at your feet?
I know.
You're all that.
A fucking Birkenstock.
It's good to make your acquaintance
And yours.
after years of your film holding a very special place in my brain. So I'm really glad you made time to talk about it.
I'm happy to, and we also, of course, share our mutual friend Jerry Metters, and he speaks so highly of you, and so I'm very excited to chat with you. And I'm sure you know how vocal I am about Don's Plum also. So
Yeah. Well, I do. I have to say, because of Jerry and because of other people who were in the film, I watched the film with this sense of, in an alternate universe, I might have been in this film. And so I think that's
amazing.
Gives me, it's weird. It's like, I feel like it gives me this license that nobody else gave me, but it makes me give myself license to judge this film maybe more harshly on moral grounds than I would if I didn't feel like I was on some level implicating myself, because I could have been one of the people in this movie. I could see myself participating in everything that's here. And so I don't judge it in a sense of like, oh, those guys are assholes, or It's more like,
yeah,
boy, it's kind of too close to home. I hope that I was never one of those guys, but I definitely sat at table. Like, I just feel those dynamics in the film.
Yeah. I think that few people were actually those guys. Those guys were, they sort of, more or less all the characters kind of carried the burden of what we were thinking was, or what we were feeling was, what we see in people probably periodically. Like, I think most people have a similar experience, and that's been at least my experience with feedback from fans of the film, is that most people have this similar experience where they see themselves, and there's kind of they see themselves in their film. There's kind of like two real reactions to that. There's people like you who embrace the film, and then there are those who almost lash out at it. And I mean, I feel a little weird saying this because it can sound kind of, self-important or something like that. But I think it's because the film, the reality that they see, the sort of mirrored image that they see of themselves through it is just an uncomfortable experience. It makes them a little bit afraid of themselves, and so they kind of lash out. It's a little bit weird, but it's been my experience so far.
Yeah, so you have told the story of this film many times. I recommend people check out the long interview you gave on the Projection Booth podcast. I felt like that was, even though I don't agree with their take on the film, that was one of those ones where I was listening to that podcast and just thinking, boy, I wish I was in the room to bring another point of view here. But your interview in that, you go into great depth talking about the story. And I want to talk around the story. We can talk about some of the details of the story. But is there some place for listeners of this, if they want to get aside from the documentary that I know you're in the middle of creating, if they want to get the full story of what we're going to be alluding to when we talk about Don's Plum, is there any particular place you would recommend people check out?
I really don't. There's really nobody telling the whole story properly. My interview in the New York Post has some goodies that I think put some clarity down on the whole thing. And I did another one for Hugging the Cactus on YouTube, which it's a pretty lengthy interview, but I felt like the interview, the sort of what came from it, explained in some reasonable detail what we went through and why it's important that people kind of pay attention to this, because beyond the film itself, whether you love or you hate it, there was a lot that I think is really scary for artists that happened with Don's Plum that I think people should pay attention to and make sure that it doesn't happen again. I mean, we're probably the only film in the history of the United States to be blocked by its cast who had no ownership in the film whatsoever. So it's a very unique and kind of ugly situation. As far as the whole story, I think it's been super disadvantageous for me personally and for others involved in the film and the film itself that there is no complete story. And I'm going to do the best to tell my side of that in a book that I'm writing right now, which I'm excited about. And I have no idea when it'll be done. I'm editing the first draft right now. I'm probably a third of the way through that process. It's been quite a journey and a really interesting ride back in time. But I think it's going to be the most thorough sort of look at what happened with Don's Plum in every respect, not just the horror story, but also the love affair. This movie was a love affair from top to bottom until it behaves like one to this day, albeit a scorned love affair.
Well, yeah, I think that's part of where the where the horror comes from. Like the horror film doesn't work if we don't sympathize. If there wasn't a moment when things were beautiful that then get destroyed by the monster that enters.
That's true, yeah.
Well, then, for the people who are not familiar with what we're talking about, can you give the sort of, I'm sure you have a brief take on, okay, this is the story of what happened to Don's Plum.
Sure, I'll do the best I can. A group of friends got together to make a film in Hollywood in 1995 during a time when there was really a renaissance of independent film. So many incredible directors were launched during the 90s and the late 80s even. And there was a fever in Hollywood and we all had it. So we all got together to make a film, and that film was Don's Plum. And Don's Plum was an experimental film. And everyone, of course, knew it was experimental because we literally had no screenplay. We worked improvisationally from top to bottom and in a manner that was rather unique to people's approach to improvisation at the time. There were very few filmmakers out there making entirely improvisational-based films. And so we engaged in this experiment with, open hearts and open minds and with our full creative force, all of us. And born from all that was Don's Plum. And Don's Plum is a real visceral piece of work from the 90s. It makes no apologies for the way, we were in this era and in this geographic, socioeconomic place. And I think that scared some people, and in particular, Tobey Macguire. And so Tobey Macguire set out on a very deliberate campaign to destroy the film. It didn't last long, and this is where the story gets really difficult to tell. But it didn't last long. The campaign only lasted really about a day, or at least it came to a head in one day. And on that day, Leonardo DiCaprio really declared war against Don's Plum and the people who made it. And so, in about in and around 2014. I was being courted by or with or to, I was actually being courted to a producer in Hollywood, a very big producer, and a project that, my baby, this project that I'd been working on for many years, developing. The producer was interested in making it. And when he found out who I was and my involvement with Don's Plum, he backed away instantly and said specifically that he couldn't afford to get on the wrong side of Leonardo DiCaprio. And so it was in 2014 that I realized that this horrible thing that happened to this beautiful film that I love is still following me around and still sort of suppressing me and and stopping me from being able to be the artist I am. And so I spoke out and I wrote an open letter to Leonardo DiCaprio, which was published on freedonsplum.com. And Leo dug in. He had the movie removed. I put it up for people to see, and he had it removed. And here we are today in 2021 with this dispute, sort of as fresh and as sore as it was in 1995. Is that, I went on so long. That
No. But for someone who that was admirable. For someone who has followed this story and was not sure how I could tell it all, and who's lived my own versions of the story and knows how hard it is to condense something that is so big and has so many details. Bravo. Job well done. And as you said, you're writing a book about it. I recommend the Projection Booth podcast. I'll put links to other podcasts that you'd like me to share where you go into more depth about this.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think the New York Post makes some terribly false claims, such as, there was any kind of greed involved on behalf of the filmmakers, and just utter nonsense. Don's Plum was, if Don's Plum had been released at the time, we would have made a small amount of money, relatively speaking. So there was just all these nonsensical things in the New York Post piece, and Leo's publicists got their fingers in it. This I'm sure of, but all in all, that interview is solid as well. So if your listeners wanted to check that out, I think that if they wanted to fall down the rabbit hole, that wouldn't be a bad one. There's some entertainment value in that one too. It's kind of funny at times.
Well, like the viewer of a horror film, I hope you're okay with, although personally I have a great deal of sympathy for your situation, that's not how I want to approach it. I want to approach this because this is for the viewers and for the listeners, and we want to encourage. I feel like this is an important film, a film that people should see, whether it's because of the actors who are in it. There's something about seeing incredibly important and talented people early in their careers that is something that is important cinematically. I think what it documents is, particularly in light of Weinstein and all the Me Too stuff, looking at that dynamic and the energy around that and the dynamics that it creates. I feel like also really, really important viewing. And then, of course, the story, the horror story of what can happen in Hollywood to artists based upon, and this is the mystery, whether I don't want to, there's a certain amount of conjecture of why did this happen? And we might be able to get into that. I hope that that's something you're getting into in your book. But purely, again, from an audience standpoint, I'll compare this to the Zapruder film. I feel like it's important in the same ways. If you're interested in history, it's an important document. If you're interested in history, it's important. A part of the important document is why it's hard to see that document and what the story around that document. And there are things that it reveals that it didn't intend to reveal, and those things are also really, really important. So getting into that, knowing that we're framing this around Don's Plum as a horror film that people don't often think of as a horror film.
Right.
What are the horrific aspects, whether it's in the story because I watched the film again last night, and there are things I feel like this is the least sympathetic character that Leonardo DiCaprio has ever played. He's beautiful. He's also, his talent, his movie star shines through incredibly, but I have never had, and this makes me like him as an actor. Actually, I feel like this about all the actors in it. And the idea that any actor who was in this movie would feel like they were poorly represented is so strange to me, because it is this movie that gave me sympathy for several of these actors, particularly Tobey Macguire, long beyond a time when other people had given up on him, because I have such a strong feeling for his performance in this film. So Anyway, with all of that as preamble, would you like to unpack a little bit about where the horror in this film lives on any of those levels?
I'd love to. The first thing I just wanted to touch on a little bit is that if there was any apprehension, if there was any fear from anyone with regards the film and what it represented, it wasn't because they were revealing anything about themselves. In fact, we were very careful about how we prepared this film and how we prepared these actors to make this film to fulfill characters. So these characters, these are characters, and of course every actor brings themselves to roles, and we have all that sort of usual goings on. But in no way, shape, or form is Derek Leonardo DiCaprio or Ian Tobey Macguire, and that's sort of like one of the sort of I think myths of the film that I'd love one day to be dispelled, which is that these guys were playing themselves. It's just they couldn't be further from the truth, and that's what I'm excited about the book. It's sort of exploring for everyone. So just to touch on that.
Actually, wait a second before you go, because that touches on something I needed to ask. So part of what's wrapped up in this is the mythology of Leonardo DiCaprio and the Pussy Posse. So you might want to talk about that to the extent that you can. I was not a part of this, but it's in reading about it. This is one of the things. And when you read that these guys were part of a entourage, for lack of a better word, that called themselves the Pussy Posse, and then you see this film, it's natural that people are going to make the connection and say, well, those guys are acting like the kind of guys who would call themselves the Pussy Posse. So how do you how do you speak to that?
I can never fault anyone for making any assumption about it. So a couple of things, right? It was journalists that labeled the group the Pussy Posse. I hung out with these guys extensively for 2.5 years at every level, from their homes to bars, hanging out with chicks, hanging out with whatever. There was never any talk foolishness of this Pussy Posse. And the other thing that is pretty funny and a crazy label is that you have a group of friends, and they're in their they're 19 to 24 years old. They're rich, they're good looking, they're chasing girls, man. Like, everybody was chasing girls, and that, they didn't stop because they didn't have to. The rest of the world, got a belly, a full-time job, a kid or two, whatever else. But these guys, they just kept partying and kept chasing skirts, right? So there was no Pussy Posse. There was just young boys being boys, and they just happened to be rich and famous and doing it. So that's sort of, and no, there was never a time that we never named ourselves. We just hung out. We were just friends. Yes, there was a core group of us that sort of moved as a one thing for a while there, and it certainly continued after our D&I left. But that was just we were just a clique, as they say, nothing more. And it had no theme or purpose. It was just we just except to have a good time. So no, there was no sort of Pussy Posse reality that we were living. That was just the sensationalism. I mean, you got Leonardo DiCaprio, right, who was then, arguably the hottest guy in film, physically. I mean, as far as beauty goes, and of course the biggest star in the world at the same time. So, it's just, selling tabloids, man. I think Nancy Jo Sales did that, and I think Nancy Jo Sales might be the person who coined that. She's a journalist and filmmaker. She actually worked with Sofia Coppola, but she coined the Pussy Posse, I believe, with New York Magazine back in the late 90s, maybe the early 2000s.
Got it. Well, this is good. This is where we can clear some of the mental brush as we work our way through this thicket.
Yeah. Can I get to the horror question?
Yes, please do.
I'm sorry to step on you. Yeah, because it's such a cool and interesting question. So for me, where the horror exists in the film, like in the creative, it was the horror of growing up, man, the horror of being faced with like all of this shit that we carry around from our fathers and our uncles and our teachers and all those who have influenced us from the previous generation and who themselves carried their luggage over to us. And so we're sitting there with all this stuff, like, this was a really interesting time for me personally as a young man, where I was being faced with all these things like homosexuality, and I'm straight, but my feelings toward it, I grew up with a bigot father. My father was an old school boomer who, gay is wrong, and he's white is right, and all these crazy things going on. My dad wasn't a white nationalist, but he was absorbed in a culture that was in and of itself innately racist. And so there were all these different things going on in the world that we were kind of coming to face. And it was kind of our generation, or at least I felt, I don't know if it was our generation, I wouldn't want to single us out, but I felt like our generation was, really, we started to face these things. We started talking about them. That's why Brad is a bisexual, and why he's defending his bisexuality as a confident choice in life. That was nothing that we would hear about in the 1980s. As I was growing up in the 80s, there's no possible way that would have been socially acceptable at a table amongst a bunch of, heterosexuals. And the interesting thing is, like, the horror of what women have to go through in the way that they're pursued by men, and how they're treated by men on a daily basis is evident at that table. And what we wanted to show, to counter that a little bit, was that the women were the ones who were really ultimately in control of everything going on in this movie. And that happens throughout. Never once do the guys get what they want because they want it. Anything that was ever, acquiesced from one of the female characters to one of the male characters was done with their willpower, not the other way around. And that was all by design. That was all by intention, because what we wanted to do was we wanted to expose the horrors of growing up, like I said, with these horrible, chains of our fathers, and all these people who had all this, had all this shitty, all these shitty things to say and do and feel about society. And we were changing. We wanted diversity. We wanted an LGBT community. We wanted, these things that we're seeing, coming to fruition now, and being ushered in by the millennials and so on. So anyway, yeah, for me, the horror was in coming face to face with these things that we were, these misogynistic moments, these bigoted moments, these moments of where we lacked empathy, and where we were refused opportunities to help rather than hinder, these kinds of things. And where we also compromised ourselves, like Connolly's character, Jeremy, and his whole thing with the female producer. And again, to show the power, the shift. We wanted to show that we believed women were gaining power in the world, and this was a big deal. This is why we brought Bethany Ashton on to write with us, because we wanted to show that, like, women were becoming more powerful. Myself and RD, who were the primary writers of the movie, we didn't take, like, we ourselves didn't make any assumptions about writing for women. We were actually nervous about it. We have a conversation that's like well documented in the book about it, where it's just like, man, we have 4 women. How are we supposed to properly represent them in this situation? And so we brought Bethany Ashton on, and she was the one who sort of helped us understand how these characters might react under these circumstances. And that helped us, build a deeper, more meaningful, more relevant story struggle between, the two genders in really what is a testosterone sort of, hormonally infused time of life, right? In our late teens to early 20s. So that's some of the horror I saw in Don's Plum that I loved. The horror of being exploited at your work so that you could get an extra shift. The horror of having to, create and find opportunities that, to just simply survive. Just all these little nuances within the film that we did in a way that we felt was like, more entertaining than, sort of preachy, like our big thing was, and Leo's big thing was, he didn't want to be, I don't want to be no preachy film. I don't want to be, and that was a big thing for me too. It was like, we really wanted to do a deep dive into subtext. And I think we did that.
So I guess depending upon who you are watching this, the horror of it is going to hit you differently. So, so if I'm I'm aware of the horror for the female characters in the film, but I don't have the same visceral reaction to it that I have to Leonardo DiCaprio's bullying. Like and it's brilliant because he captures something that I know really well. I think anyone who is ever like the target of that behavior knows it really well. And he just really twisted the knife on that. Where was the decision to make that central to your movie star character?
Well, we didn't want Leo to have a romantic the whole thing was about uncovering the discomfort of life and the discomfort in these characters. What was it that they were being faced with that was going to somehow change them and shape them in their future. And we were supposed to take this footage, by the way, and we were supposed to cut it juxtaposed to documentary footage. Actually, that was the original vision for the film, was that we were going to be, we would shoot these scenes and then we would cut documentary footage, as I said, juxtaposed to, their sort of commentary on life and how they're going through life. But with Derek, we just didn't. We started out, we just didn't want a character that we didn't want Derek. We wanted Derek to be the opposite of what you would expect, visually, which would be this charismatic, I'm going to pick up girls, it's going to be cool. We kind of wanted to sort of toss that on its head, because I think we wanted to not be typical with Derek, and so because he was being played by Leo, frankly.
Oh, and I just say the scene where DiCaprio is calling people on his friend's phone, and his friend is just just yapping at him. Brilliant. One of many. That's one of the things that that could get lost in this discussion, and I want to keep it in here. There are several things in this movie that just cinematically, as a standalone scene, beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and that's one of them.
It was a magical movie. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that we shot this movie. We shot 75% of this movie in 3 days, and how these different little moments sort of came together were incredible. That one, very interesting. We had worked so hard and so fast that when we got to Leo's last night, he was only there for 2 of the 3 nights. And you see how long and how much Leo is in the film. So it just goes to show you the magic that was going down on that set. We got all of Leonardo DiCaprio's and everyone around him. We got all of their performance in 2 nights. So as Leo needs to leave, he's got to get on a plane and go to shoot Marvin's Room in New York. And he's literally leaving from our set to the airport. And so we cut, I forget what we were shooting. It was something in the diner. We cut. And then we're like, okay, that's it. That was it. I think that was actually the Jenny Lewis scene. That's what it was. We had just shot he and Jenny Lewis's scene in the bar. And we cut that, and that was the wrap. And that was a Leonardo DiCaprio rap. So I called the rapper. One of us called the rap, and Leo was like, no, we have to shoot Jerry Swindall. That's the guy playing Leon in that scene. And we had planned to bring Jerry in because he's such a funny character. And so we were like, just by default, this kid was just a funny kid. Like you spend 3 minutes with him and your eyes are just leaking, you're keeled over. It's crazy. So we were like, okay, yeah, man. So we cut, and then Leah, we cut. We didn't have time. We were wrapped. We had to flip the diner to get back to serving customers, because we were wrapping by morning and flipping before the morning crew came in. Everyone their eggs in the morning. So we had to hustle our butts out of there. And so Leo turns to us and he's like, no, dude, we have to do it. And so we looked at our DP, Stephen Adcock, and we were like, can we just rig something up quick? And so we quickly scrambled for that hallway shot. We set up a low shot, threw 1 key up. I don't think we had anything other than that key light up on there. And then we shot that scene in 1 take. It took about 45 minutes to an hour to set up the shot, because we were still breaking down the cameras from the Jenny Lewis stuff. But it was Leo. Leo literally pushed for that scene, and it was a last second to get it in there. And it's such a brilliant scene. Like the film wouldn't be the same without that scene. Like I don't think the film would be the same without that scene.
So I'm looking up this actor, Jerry Swindall. This was his last film.
Yeah.
Before this, he's in Quick and the Dead, Telling Lies in America, and The Beach. And then is there a story there? Because he's great in this. I thought he was just like a real weirdo, but that's an acting performance.
The story there is that, yes, they met on Quick and the Dead, right? And then he put him in The Beach. But the story there was that I don't think Swindall liked acting. I don't think he was very good at it. And that's the funny thing. Like he could do that, what he did for us there, brilliantly. You know, it was just so like, we had to write him back in. It was so he did that scene with Leo that morning. That was the what would be Sunday morning, technically. Mm-hmm. We wrap Leo, we go to bed. Before we go to bed, RD and I sit down. I'm like, we got to bring Jerry back. We're like, yeah, we got to bring Jerry back, Jerry Swindall. So that's when we wrote him, and Nikki Cox coming in later with when Leo's in the back with Jenny, and he's like, fucking beasted, dude, you know. And so we wrote Jerry in there, and so Jerry came back the next day, which he wasn't originally scheduled for, and that's the fun of shooting improv. We literally threw our entire crew, our first AD, and you've been in film, you know this. We threw that wrench in. We're like, hey, we got a new scene, everybody, and they're like, fuck you. Yeah, new scene, let's do it. You know, and so anyway, that just to sort of some lore on that scene, because it's one of my favorites, and I wish I could show it to everyone uncut, because it literally is. It's a perfect take. It's the most perfect take I've ever seen. It's just comedic brilliance from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. And when we cut it, having to cut it in between anything else was heartbreaking. Our first cut of the film, the movie just opened with that scene. And then, of course, we had to write a proper opening. We had written a proper opening and shot it, but that's another story. Our B unit just failed on every level in the first shoot. So we had to go and replace those shots. And that's when we found Toledo Diamond.
Okay, so back to the horror. The horror of
I love the horror.
Don's Plum. The other place that I feel like it really lives is with the Jenny Lewis character. I find her character and her performance to be so contradictory, interesting. Like, it's almost like she's doing the subtler version of Leo's character. It's here now. You got me calling him Leo. I made a rule for myself. I don't know this person. He is DiCaprio. He is Leonardo DiCaprio. To me, you can call him Leo. But so there's something about her character, because it's not played purely for sympathy. And again, you're saying this is all improvised. Is that her creation? Is that the team's creation? Talk about the genesis of that character.
So with every character, we created what we called character sheets. And so we built their personalities in the form of, sort of personality modules on a page. And then we would take those and translate those onto index cards. And from those, we would build reactions to various situations and conversations. And then we would introduce those through a rehearsal process. So what we did, it was an extremely dynamic process, and it's well documented in the book. And it's so interesting, in my opinion. I mean, I'm obviously biased, but I really think people will dig it. This book is going to be the ultimate companion to Don's Plum. If you're a fan of the movie, you end up becoming a fan of this movie. And the book is just going to be something to devour, because I really get into the weeds about how we developed these characters and how we developed the storyline and the movements of the film. But it was very dynamic. So, once we finally got everybody cast, and we knew all of our females, and we of course had our friends cast in the male roles. We just began adding and subtracting ideas to the characters based on how the actors responded to the things that we were giving them, and the actors were throwing things in and peppering things in. So, it was very much a collaboration. Jenny was a massive contributor to her character, obviously, but her character Sarah ultimately was created by RD and I, based on an original character created by David Stutman. But as far as the process goes of creating, the subtleties and the subtexts of Sarah, I'll tell you, for all the characters, and I think Jenny is just a genius. I think that Jenny was one of could have been a generational talent in acting. I just
Instead, she decided to be a generational talent in music. I mean, you got to make your choices, I guess.
I saw her years after all this shit went down with Don's Plum at the ArcLight, and I bumped into her, and it was lovely to see her, and I gave her a big hug, and she said, I got out of that shit, bro," referring to Don's Plum, like the controversy, the trouble, the like career ending. She's never said anything like this, but I just suspect that performance meant a lot to her, and I think that it definitely changed the direction of her life. Music was always going to be in her life. She was she was big into music at the time that we shot Don's Plum. We knew her because we were very close. I was a very close friend of Blake Sennett, who was then Blake Sober, and who founded Rilo Kiley. But before we digress too far, or before I digress too far, Jenny Lewis I believe she could have been a generational talent. She offered so much to Sarah. It's just, I can't even possibly begin to break down where and what and how and what her method of thinking was. She was an incredibly responsive person to direction or suggestion. Before she went into her confessional in the bathroom, she and I had a very long conversation about what this film really meant to me. And I felt like she, more than any other actor that I worked with, I didn't work with every single one that went into the confessionals, but I worked with her specifically, and she was the one for me who really captured everything that went on that night in her own personal struggle and story in that mirror, all the way to taking full control. And a lot of people don't know this about Don's Plum, and because Don's Plum's a slice of life, there's no real spoiler here. Don's Plum is about how we're going to be okay. How despite the fact that we are these things, that we are shedding these things from our lives, and being born and reborn again as different versions of ourselves as we learn what works and what doesn't work for who it is that we want to be. That through that struggle, in the end, that everything's going to be all right, and that we're going to be able to ultimately inherit the earth and be able to do what our fathers did before us and their fathers before them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really the whole what Don's Plum is all about. But Don's Plum is about how generations, despite their struggles, will find the strength and gain the wisdom to move through life with purpose and with good intent. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's what it means in the end.
It makes sense, but I guess to me that's where it shifts to horror, because to the bystander, what you see is that all happy endings are fake, and that Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Macguire are going to grow up, that these bullies, no offense, because again, we're doing this mental, I'm not saying that these people are the same, but because of the mystique around it and around movie stars, these guys go on to conquer the world and basically raise the village that they came from. And by raise, I'm talking about in the sense of bombing it, and not in the sense of raising it up with them. And again, you're in the personal of this. I think anyone who has experienced a friend becoming famous, I mean, Shakespeare wrote about it in the Henry plays that Orson Welles made into Chimes at Midnight, that there is something that happens when your friends blow up. And it's not always laid so bare, and the characters are not always so universal to us. But to me, part of the horror in this is the punishment for a job well done. And I think that's something that people who have worked in, maybe not just in the entertainment business, but definitely in the entertainment business, can recognize, of believing so much, listening to you talk about this, hearing, I mean, I heard this in your interview in the projection booth, just you can still hear the love and affection you have for these guys. And there's a tragedy and a horror to that I mean, I'm super excited that you're taking ownership of your story, and that we root for the survivor in that tale, but it's a lot harder road. And so, yeah, I think that when we were talking about the ending, and I think that's where sort of the crux of where the Zapruder film factor of this film, as opposed to its creative intentions, that's where it goes off the rails. That we all went into 1995 thinking that things were going to be glorious, and then
Right. ...
look at the rest of our lives. You know, I don't want to give the litany of things that we've lived through since then, but I feel like the film has this odd prescience that comes from being ignorant of just how hard the world it's going into the next morning is. Anyway, that's my rant, but what do you make of it?
I mean, I think that's just perfectly said. And I'll tell you though, that I had no idea of that at the time, because at the time I was living in that world where I believed I had this this epic optimism, where I believed that, that where this was going was all up, and not just, going all up as far as me I'm talking like I felt like we were cleaning ourselves up as people. Yeah, consciousness was expanding. I believe the world was becoming a better place. I believe that the old shitty people were dying off, and I mean that fucking literally, and, not that I'm wishing death on anyone, but see you later, because I felt like the world has been, suppressed and oppressed and repressed by these people forever. And it's all ignorance based, because I really believe that we were actually, going through that change, and no, that change never happened. Speaking to that first horror, just to kind of give you some perspective on that, to put it simply, as far as the transition from, making this film, I'm sorry to be a little scattered. First, let me address this. Yeah, I mean, when I speak about them, when I go back in time, and I talk about this, and I'll tell you, it took me getting mentally healthy. By the time I did the projection booth interview, my mental health had improved substantially. Prior to that, I'd been immersed in a deep depression that produced suicidal ideation and all kinds of real serious issues. I'd gotten to the point where I'd been planning a suicide, and the whole thing had gotten really completely out of control. Fortunately, I live with an angel, and she, saw this degradation happening, and she got proactive, and she started putting me on these supplements, these natural supplements, and my mental health slowly started to improve. And as my mental health improved, I was able to go back in time and remember the affection, and remember the love, and remember the fun times that we had together, the laughter. I never laughed more in my life than I did in the presence of Leonardo DiCaprio. He's one of the funniest people I ever knew, and we were surrounded by more and more and more funny people. It was just this incredibly fun time. And so, yeah, when I go back into that and I remember all the things that I was buying into in that life, I think about it affectionately, you bet. And that's sort of what paved the way for me to be able to write a book about it. Because, if I tried to write a book while I was immersed in this deep depression, which, was a decades-long depression, if I'd have tried to, write in this state of mind, it would have been a woe is me book. It would have been a book about, it wouldn't have been a book about our spirit. It wouldn't have been a book about our love for film, our insatiable appetite for experiment. I mean, we wanted to try everything. We did. Here's some of the crazy little shits we were doing, playing with this movie, and the risks that we knew we were taking while we were doing it. We weren't afraid to fail because, we had come to terms with the idea that could happen, and once we came to terms with the idea that failure was a possibility in the work, we were set free, completely set free. And, we weren't going to create a masterpiece, and nor did we, but we were able to touch something, something, real, something timeless. People to this day are having the same reaction to Don's Plum that they had in 1996 and 1997 when we were doing private screenings. They're having the same reaction to the movie 25 fucking years later. That's a filmmaker's dream come true. So I'm absolutely passionate about all of that history because it became more meaningful in 2021 by virtue of its tenacity and its constant relevance. It's never been irrelevant, and that's because what we were able to touch in our own scrappy way was a truth that exists in the human condition in this country. that we can all recognize and see in not only ourselves, but in the people that we know and knew. And I think that's really fucking amazing. And it's scary at the same time because it fucking tells you that we're not progressing, we're not getting anywhere. And that's a part of the horror story here, for sure. In fact, you could say we're regressing. How could you have so little progress on women's rights after all of these fucking years? How? How could there be even a notion of it? Let alone what's going on with, race and inequality. So it's just, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you don't apologize at all. No, it made me think of, so Leonardo DiCaprio's characters, the targets of, if we can look at him, if this is a horror film and there's a monster in the movie, he kind of fulfills the role of the monster, sympathetic monster, whatever, in that he has certain targets and certain victims. One is the heavy African-American woman. One is the Buddy Holly looking guy. One is the hippie girl. One is his gay friend. And you could say that on a predatorial level, there's also Jenny Lewis is in there some way, but also I feel like her character is more interesting because she isn't entirely sympathetic. Like the other ones, you're all like, he's just kind of picking on you and that sucks. Whereas with her, it's a more complicated dynamic that's going on. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about the decision of who his targets are in this film. Was that built into the structure of it, or was that improv? Talk about that. And I think particularly since she's your own, is she the only? Well, the heavyset black woman, I feel like that is the most, if this is Jaws, that's the most brutal attack. There's something about that, and I think in reading about it, I think that's the one that sits the worst and hurts the most. And so I kind of like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, well, that is an interesting story. So with regards to the black lady in the movie, who is heavyset and who Derek in particular makes fun of her weight. And so again, originally our original vision for Don's Plum, which was then called the Saturday Night Club, by the way, was that we would shoot, our cast in these fictional situations, and then we would cut that juxtaposed to real life documentary footage. And so I wanted to tackle obesity in America, because obesity in America is a problem, was a problem, continues to be a problem. So so the original scene was written for a giant white 450-pound dude that we picked we cast him from Extras Casting. And this guy was like 450 pounds. He was coming into the restaurant. He was going to be this massive thing. And so that was our original casting choice. And the topic was obesity in America. And then on the day of, we got word from our casting company. They were like, he's not coming. And so I turned to RD and I was like, what are we going to do? And we decided to send out some PA to go look for any obese person they could find on the streets of Los Angeles and see if they'd like to be in a movie. And so we sent out 2 sets of scouts while we set the shot up, and they scoured downtown and the valley and everywhere where we know, where there was like high foot traffic. And she was the person they came back with. And so what was super interesting about it was that, her race had nothing to do with it. She was there because of her weight and her weight only. And it was actually a kind of a sweet and tender thing on the set, because she showed up and we were very uncomfortable with the idea of shooting her at first. But she was in control of the situation. She was like, I'm comfortable with this. We go right ahead and do this. And she was very verbose about it. And even Leo had approached her and said, look, I'm going to be saying terrible things and I'm going to be treating you kind of bad. And I'm already feeling bad. She's like, you don't have to feel bad about nothing. And they even had a little hug. And it was just a tender, it actually makes me a little emotional. It was a really, really tender moment.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then,
I'm really glad I asked about that.
We shot the scene and he was brutal and he attacked her as he promised he would. And that's all written, Leo's character, Derek, was written that way. It wasn't a choice. I would say he escalated it. There was this moment, I think you might have heard me say this in somewhere else along the way, but there was a moment when we were talking about building Derek as a character. He said, I'm going to play him as my asshole self times 10. And we were like, that's perfect, Mm-hmm. So he was brutal and he went after her. And then when we cut, we went and checked her well-being. We were like, how are you? And she was like, I'm fine. She's like, but I'll tell you what, if they had done that, and we were one take, no rehearsal. We didn't get that much shot in 2 days by doing a whole bunch of takes. So we were just one take, no rehearsal on everything that we could. And so we run her through, and then after the scene, she says, but in real life, I would have dressed him down for talking about me that way. And we were just like, oh shit, it's an improv movie. You should have fucking done that. And so we felt like we lost something. Interestingly enough, I felt pain because I wanted to shoot it again. And RD was right. He was like, well, first of all, we're not going to shoot it again because we can't. And he was like, and even if we did, that kind of authentic, that moment is gone now. And now she's gonna come up with something contrived because she had a reaction, But isn't that a cool story about her? She was a lovely, lovely woman, and she was brave. And we didn't think about anything in terms of what there might be racially represented in there because there was zero thought about that. I think today, if I were to cast that, or if I were to make this movie today, I don't think I would have let that scene go down like that.
Yeah,
I think I would have changed the scene.
So that leads to the fight at the table with who's the actress who plays the hippie girl who gets picked up by Kevin Connolly's character?
Amber Benson. Sorry. No, you're good.
But that leads to that blow up. Now there's stories again, as someone who, I got a videotape of this in '95. I have one of the cuts, so mine still has time code. The version that I've lived with, it has stuff that was cut out.
You've got the best cut of the movie. You have the best cut of the movie for sure. You do. That's the best cut of the movie for sure. It's not the best looking, but it
doesn't matter. It's funny. I watched it again last night, and actually Jerry had sent me the link to the actual
HD copy,
and I was just like, nah. And it started running. I was like, oh man, this the sound of this is so bad, but my feeling for it. Again, that's what part of my own personal experience, the Zapruder tape quality of it is it's like having a bootleg of your favorite band. And, but it's for me, it's so special because having a friend who's kind of in that band. So you got a tape. So it's a personal thing. So anyway, my point is I've been following this a long time. And one of the stories around the films that I've heard lots of different rumors. Now, is that a real fight or a real meltdown that happened between them? Was that organized? Because her reaction is also part of what is visceral for me. I've been her in more situations than I've been him. And the way that scene goes down is very real. You captured something very real. I would call it the cowardice of groups. Do you want to talk about how that scene went down?
Yeah, let's see. So we went through a pretty extensive casting process for the time and resources that we had. I can't really tell you how many to be sure, but probably a couple hundred girls over a 10-day period. We rotated them in and out of rehearsals. And that was how we did our casting session because it was improv. We didn't have sides or anything like that. So we'd bring the girls in and we would sit them at the table with the guys and we would consider that rehearsal for the guys, audition for the girls. And that's sort of how we went through the process of finding our actors. Amber was on RD's list. He loved her from the Soderbergh film that she's in that I can't remember the name of. King of the, what was one of his really early ones?
Oh yeah. I didn't know.
I want to say King of the Hill, but it's
I think it is King of the Hill. You're right. You're absolutely right. It is
it
King of the
might
Hill.
be, right? So one of the early Soderbergh films, and she's in it. RD really liked her in that, Amber Benson, and so he called her in, and she auditioned like the rest of the girls, and she stuck around longer than most, and we rotated her into a couple of roles, and she really seemed to fit Amy well, and so we liked her, and we ended up in a situation where we as a group kind of sat around and talked about all the girls, and we as a group decided that Amber Benson was good, and we were going to cast her, and that she was our best candidate. And Amy, the role that she got was it wasn't a hotly contested role. Like there weren't a lot of great candidates for it. So it was kind of like a meh at the moment kind of feeling about that particular character. Meadow Sisto was red hot in Juliet, and certainly Jenny Lewis as Sarah was just just absolutely amazing. And so that role, yeah. So, but we went with Amber, and RD and I did it enthusiastically. We thought she was great in the auditions. I don't know, maybe it was a week before shooting, Leo calls us up and he wants to talk about Amber. And he's like, I just don't think she's strong enough, and it's bothering me. And so he asked us to try and find somebody else for the role of Amy. And this is whatever. I mean, I'm talking like days, could be a week. I don't know, very short period between where we were and shooting. And so we hung up the phone and talked about it. And we were just not happy with the idea of doing that. And so we decided that the best way to do it was to have Derek, since Derek was already written as this, just this god awful human being, that we would just have him attack her, verbally assault her until the point that she leaves, and then she'll go. And so we called her up and we said, "Hey Amber, here's the situation." We were just absolutely forthright with her. We were like, Leo wanted us to move on with a different actor. We prefer this solution. Would you be down? Would you be willing to do this? Because my guess is he's going to come at you pretty hard. And she was cool with it. And then we called up Leo and we're like, Leo, we're not happy with this idea. This solution's not cool, but here's a solution we do like, and we hope you'll be down with it. And he actually got excited about it. He was like, so I get to just like completely unleash on her? Absolutely, we said. And so we had this arrangement, this contract between these two parties, and we moved forward with it. And I'll tell you, man, once again, just like Leo is a consummate professional, was then, I imagine he still is today. He talked great, he had no personal issue with Amber Benson whatsoever. He was kind to her. He prepared her for what was coming. He was like, I'm going to be extremely brutal. She's like, bring everything you got. We were super excited about it because it was a conflict that didn't previously exist in the writing. And so no, we got some real creative benefit out of it.
Oh, that's great.
And then when it actually rolled and the cameras actually rolled, the glass being thrown, that was not written. Her, Amber throwing her sandal was not written. That was all, brand new live on the spot improv.
So that improv about the irony of the Birkenstock, that's a Jenny Lewis original?
That's 100%. Yeah, 100% Jenny on the spot original. Yeah. So it was a great moment, man. When that glass hit, I wanted to call cut, even though it's not my job to. And RD just grabbed a hold of me because he and I were just tied at the hip, right? So RD just grabs me, he's like making sure I don't say shit, because he wanted like it to just sit and like soak in this idea. Because when Leo threw that glass, none of us had any clue, and that was a real glass, and that was a fucking stupid thing to do. It was dangerous. He should never have done it, but he did it. It happened. We captured it. We continued to roll afterward to make sure we got as much of the after effects as possible. But the reason why you see Leo react so viscerally to the fact that he threw that glass is because it's a real glass. It was a really fucking stupid and dangerous thing to do. And in most other sets, there'd be a fucking, there'd be a shit fit about it for safety, And but he did it anyway, and there it was, and it was like it turned out to be like such an amazing moment. And then when and the best part about it, dude, was like before the glass, right? So she goes storming off, and she throws her Birkenstock, her sandal, and runs through the doors. And now when she runs through the doors, RD and I are right there with Video Village. So she runs through the doors, Amber Benson, and she's like, oh shit, I threw my sandal. And she looks down, and she's like, and RD's like, go get it. She's like, what? Go get it fucking now. Go get it. So she turns around and walks in. Like those guys do not know she's coming back. That is all, straight up brand fucking new. And so she turns around, out she goes, runs at the table to get her Birkenstock, and the rest ensues.
That's one of many great scenes. Now, my favorite scene in the movie is at the beginning. This is I don't know if there's any horror involved in this. This is just pure, like, I got to fan out with you a little bit. The opening scene, that dance number, musical scene with Tobey Maguire, which is, to me, this is the first time I've ever seen Tobey Maguire as on film, is that scene. I'm watching and thinking, okay, they wanted to get Tom Waits. They couldn't get Tom Waits. Chucky Weiss wasn't available. This is not the Viper Room, but it might be Smalls, but it's not Smalls. Like, I know this place and these places, so I'm watching it partly with an insider's eye, partly just like, this is audacious to have this dance musical scene in the aesthetic that I totally love.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that scene? How does that end up in this movie?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So we shot the first 3 days, and from that yielded everything that you see in the diner and in the back room with Kevin and the producer, and with Leo and Jenny, the Jerry Swindall and Leonardo DiCaprio scene, the Jerry and or they go the Leon and Derek scene, all the bathroom scenes, all that was shot in the 3 days. Much of the opening, like, montage stuff was shot with our B unit. All that in those first 3 days, and then we cut everything we shot together, and we ended up with somewhere between 72 and 75 minutes of the film. And everything that we had sent out a B unit to do all of our establishing shots of all the characters at their homes and various other locations, and it was a disaster. What they returned was horrible, just unusable stuff. And it wasn't their fault. It was just like a ridiculous thing to even ask them to do. We get no gear, a camera and an actor, and no crew, and we're like, make it happen. And they came back with shit because we gave them shit. But so after we assembled the 72 to 75 minutes, we knew we needed to reshoot all that stuff. And so, and that meant we can start over. And I don't know, somewhere around probably January 96, we got a call from Leo, and he was like, hey man, there's this, and you're going to love this because you'll remember this club. He's like, there's this really cool act at the Union. Do you remember the Union?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the Union on Sunset.
Okay.
So he goes,
who was the act?
The Toledo Diamond. He's still fucking going to this day. Still going. Toledo Diamond, he had this act. Leo invited us all. He's like, you guys got to come check this out. It was the hottest thing I'd ever seen. Like, it was just so on fire hot. Like, it was like, fuck. Like, you watch that show and you just wanted to go out and just fuck anything that walked. I mean, I hate to be crude, but it was just hot as hell. And so Artie and I went with all of our friends, at Leo's behest, and the show blew me away. It was so sexually charged, and I felt like that's what our first 72 minutes was in Don's Plum. I felt like it was just purely sexually charged energy. There was just nothing but, hormones and testosterone flying all over the place on that table and in that bar. And so I just felt like it fit, and so did RD. And so as soon as we saw the show, we knew right there. We were, we drove home, and on the ride home, we were like, we have to put this is it. This is what we're going to open the film with. And so I took that and I went and I actually scripted all those scenes. And we, I think it was like, if it wasn't the next day, it was within a couple that we drove out to the Union to go talk to we're just going to talk to whomever might be there. We were on Sunset Boulevard, driving around talking about it with Jerry Metters, I believe, but Jerry may not have been there, but I think he might have been, actually. I'm not positive. But in any case, we were like, hey man, let's just drop in and talk to somebody, because we're talking about it. We want this guy in the movie. So we were on Sunset. We jumped out of the car, went to the Union. He was there rehearsing Toledo. We pitched him right there. We just said, hey, we're making this movie. It's with this hot up and coming actor, Leo DiCaprio, and we want you in it. And he came on board. And here's the coolest thing about this. And this movie just kept having these like really cool little things that happened that ended up on camera. You know, there's all these little stories about films and, well, somebody did this and somebody did that. But you get these like precious moments, like when, you know, like when Harrison Ford, you know, shot the guy with the swords because he was sick that day. Right. Like we had a bunch of these little types of things happening in our film. So not nearly as impactful as that, obviously, but like, you know, in the Toledo Diamond stuff. So we show up at the Union to shoot, and Toledo's there with his band and his dancers, and we're starting to set everything up and, you know, kind of figure out our blocking and, you know, all these kinds of things while camera and lights are busy, you know, getting their gear up. And Toledo comes up to me and Ardeen, he's like, hey man, he's like, I got a surprise for you guys. And he's like, surprise, and is like we're gonna shoot this surprise? He's like, yeah. I was like, well, we have to know what it is because we got to tell we're shooting a film. We have to know what we're shooting. And he was like, well, I don't want to. It's a surprise. And we were like, okay, fine. We'll hook him up with John Schindler, who was our line producer. And so Toledo went over in the corner with John and told him what he had planned for us. And so then they figured it out logistically, how they were going to shoot it. And then we, you know, when the time came for his surprise to be unveiled, it was the girl singing, you know, the part with the mic where she's like, and she's doing the lyrics, you know, he wanted to fuck me, not just fuck me, but fuck me, you know. Yeah. Only the me that he knew, like that, all that really sexy shit. So that just came out of nowhere. Like we didn't see that in his act ever. We never knew that existed. When we asked him for the masters, he didn't give us a master with her performance on it because he had two cuts. He had just his live performance cut, which does not have that performance, and then he has the one with her and that performance as well. That's all sort of added content to the song. And so that was all just thrown in on the spot while we were at the diner, at the Union Club. But yeah, he was brilliant. We just loved him. And yeah, man, of course. I mean, everybody knew he was basically a Tom Waits act of sorts, but he had his own thing going on too. And definitely. You know, it was like, you could tell he was wildly inspired by Tom Waits, but it was in a good way. I mean, he's spilling that acid jazz all over the place, man. The guy was like, he was just super cool, I thought. And we got lucky with it. You know, it just, I mean, I think you agree because you're calling it, you know, some of your favorite stuff in the film. It just worked with everything. Like I knew we could tie it in with what we were headed toward at the diner and do it relatively seamlessly. Some argue that we go on too long about it, but it was just hard not to.
There are always people who do that. They have no joy in their lives. Critics, there are people who have to watch 3 movies in a day. I get it, but that's not how anyone who actually likes movies watches them. I do want to speak to something because this brings us back to the horror. Sorry, it is the month of Wrongtober, and so it is we are obligated to frighten ourselves into winter. But this scene, as an actor who played kind of similar roles, a Tobey Macguire type actor, you know, dark-haired, everyman type roles. That's like, so I watch it from a sense, and that could make you competitive with an actor. I didn't feel that at all, but watching that, I'm like, this is such cinematic love for Tobey Macguire. By this time, Leonardo DiCaprio is already a star, but nobody knows who this guy is. And you drape him in such a cool thing in this. So this is just trying to place. So the filming finishes, it's great, and Tobey Macguire is still into it, and you make this basically a music video around him being awkwardly adorable in a way that if I was casting movies, I want that guy in my movie. And like I said, I think just that scene alone still has me on team Tobey Macguire as an actor.
I understand. If
you imprint on someone as a movie star, you know, I still like Mel Gibson's movies. I can't help it because I imprinted on Mad Max and films that before I knew that I should be wary. So I guess the point of all of this is, I think watching this, and when you watch it, I wonder what you think. Were you consciously trying to place Tobey Macguire on par with Leonardo DiCaprio as like, these are two stars, when only at that point really one of them is a star.
Yeah. So no, I like that. So yeah, no, he was the benefactor of a creative opportunity. Like he's just, Tobey Maguire is a lucky man in general. I believe, and he was lucky in this case. No, absolutely not. So no, that's right. Tobey Maguire was absolutely nobody at the time, and he was as much a sort of struggling actor as anyone I knew. He was auditioning like everybody I knew. He didn't have to hold down a second job because he had a couple of series under his belt, so he had some money and some residual money coming in that kept him afloat. But he drove an old shitty Toyota, and he was hanging on. I mean, there are moments in the film where people, where their real shit comes out. And there's that moment where Leo says, poor guy wears the same shirt every day. And you can see how much that hits Tobey, because there was a class disparity between the two of them. There was a class disparity between all of us and Leo, except maybe Connolly. Connolly was killing it on Unhappily Ever After financially at the time. So he was doing really well financially, nowhere near what Leo was doing, but still. So no, he was just a fucking benefactor of like a creative opportunity. We saw this. His character fit best for this situation. We were able to bring Juliet in. We thought Meadow would really be beautiful in that scene and in that environment. So we felt really good about her in that world, and so it was just a good fit. Whereas with and the other thing is here's some fun shit for you, Andras, that as a fan of the movie. So, we write this, we cut the first 75 minutes of the movie together, and I write the all that opening stuff I wrote, tailored really to what we'd cut together with the 72 minutes that will eventually follow it, right? So the scene between Jenny Lewis and Scott Bloom, right? Sarah and Brad, where they're in the Black Widow's bed, right? He's in the bed smoking the long brown cigarette. She's off in the chair. And they have what is one of my favorite scenes, if not my favorite scene. In the movie.
Okay.
I think I know. Yeah, the scene where Scott Bloom's like, you have a beautiful bathroom at the end of it, right? So that scene. So that scene I wrote that scene specifically because when we were cutting the opening of their scenes at the diner months before I wrote that scene, when we were cutting that stuff, she says in a conversation about him, because we had a backstory that they had sex. She says to him, I don't want you to talk about tonight. Not that there is something to talk about, but just, remember all that? She says all that. Well, because she has a reaction at the table, right? And when she goes like, hey, so what did you guys do? He's like, oh, we went to the movies. And then he goes, we had a great night. Scott Bloom's character, Brad, goes, we had a great night. And the camera's on, we had an angle on Jenny. And she was just like, she was troubled by him saying that. Now, she made a choice there that was not written. I had no idea what the fuck she was doing when she was improvising that moment when we were shooting back in July. So cut to March, right? Or cut to January when I'm December and January when I'm writing all this shit. I'm like, fuck, I'm going to write to that reaction. So that means to me that she makes him promise not to talk about the night. Because the only thing I'd come up with was like, you're not going to mention to anybody that we've had any kind of fucking sex or anything, because she wanted to be open, right? Because she was this, promiscuous, sexually sort of confused character. And so I was like, well, I'm going to write to all that. So I just think that's really fucking cool, because that whole thing was based on an expression that she gave us in that opening scene in the diner in the first 72 minutes.
Well, that really helps, because there is something confusing about how much she is on Derek's arm from the very jump, even though she's there with the Scott Bloom character.
Yeah.
And
the turning point there, by the way, is when she's upset at him for not telling her that he's a bisexual. And that was the turning point. That's the turning point in the dynamic of that, which was written, by the way. So the idea there was that they separated. So what we saw this dynamic between Leo and Jenny that we loved in rehearsals. And so we began writing. In fact, actually, Juliet was supposed to be the character of interest by Derek at the table, Meadow Sisto's character. It was through the rehearsal process that we saw that there was a better dynamic, or a dynamic we saw more fun to exploit between Jenny and Leo as performers, as actors. And so we switched it, and in order to switch that, we had to create this catalyst for that. And the catalyst was that Brad had withheld this information about her sexuality. And then we were able to bring to bear from that the debate about why is there a double standard to and stigma around being a gay homosexual man compared to being a lesbian woman. And so we were able to put or to have sexual curiosity, bisexual curiosity as a woman compared to bisexual curiosity as a man. There was a big difference, in our society on feelings about that, and we wanted to explore that.
Oh yeah, and wait, on that, on the subject of Scott Bloom, what's the deal with him in this film? He kind of, if we don't know who anyone else is, he sort of shows up as the star because he's the first one we see. He has this through line with Jenny Lewis, and yet he obviously didn't become a big star after this film, and I haven't really heard from him at all. So I'm just kind of curious, how did he become a part of this? Was he a part of that crew at that time? Just tell me the story of Scott Bloom and Don's Plum.
Yes. So Scott Bloom was definitely a part of our group, right? A very key part of it. And he was there long before I ever got involved. It's a funny thing, Scott Bloom, because he has a bit of a complex, and this is true. He has a bit of a complex of being kind of forgotten. He's like this guy who never got, when they talk about the so-called pussy posse in the press, rarely do they ever mention his name. They talk about Connolly and they talk about Lucas Haas and they talk about all these others, but they never really bring up Scott. It's kind of it's a kind of a funny thing because it's hard not to forget Scott Bloom. Even in my deposition archive, I have everybody's depositions except Scott Bloom's. I have no idea why I don't have Scott Bloom's. It's this weird thing where Scott is kind of there and not there at the same time. It's just a weird, and he actually is living it. And I know this because I actually ran into him in 2010 or 2011. It was the first time I'd seen him in years and years and years. And it was the last time I'd seen him also. But we kind of talked about that because every time, any press came up about Don's Plum, for some reason, Scott Bloom is just his name is not on anyone's tongue. It's a weird thing. And yet, I think that, and I think what all that is I think that's like just pure evidence of how Don's Plum, not only could have helped him, but really hurt him, And this is the thing that I think that, in terms of the horror of it all, and the horror theme is that I don't think people recognize as much as that it wasn't just, me and RD and Jerry that were being harmed here. It was all these other actors, and Scott Bloom was just, the impact on him was huge. Yeah, it's true. None of us really saw him again, and acting was something he loved and something he wanted to do. Sure, he wanted to expand to other things like writing and so on, but it was acting that, where his first love was. And he and I were very close friends. Between writing and acting, those were his two, super big passions. He loved music, but he wasn't much of a musician. His brother, on the other hand, Michael Bloom, was like a huge, amazing guitarist. But anyway, I digress. Scott Bloom, it's just a weird thing. He's a guy I've mixed feelings with personally, just because he was a part of really the big betrayal of Don's Plum and of us personally. But his talent, I thought, was just all over the film, and it's just so weird to me that he doesn't get the recognition I think he truly deserves for a performance that I thought was really mysterious and dark, deep, and I think was a big part of the overall experience of the film.
Yeah. It's well, I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk about it. I guess I find myself relating very deeply I relate to him as in that dynamic more than I do to anyone else. Like, he seems so uncomfortable with these guys, and to the point of hostility, and not necessarily just the queerness, but just just that discomfort. Like, he's the only one there who seems sensitive all the way through the film. And now hearing his story makes me even more sympathetic to him. I have this scene in the book where he takes me aside, and I take him aside actually, because he's kind of withdrawn from the rehearsals, and I'm saying, and I say to him, what's going on? Like, you're kind of just out of it. And he goes, he's like, and he said this, and I love him for saying this. This is in sum and substance how it went down. But he was just like, I don't want to sit here and compete for screen time with Leonardo DiCaprio, and that's what I see that's going on right now. And it was a really cool thing because, we were sitting here trying to mold these performances around what we knew was going to be this really big deal, right? This Oscar-nominated actor sitting at the table. And here's this guy not only recognizing our problem, but identifying with it in a completely different way than we were, from our angle, from our side. And it caused him to withdraw from the filming, or from the improvs. Yeah.
And then we finally, we finally found where his comfort sort of, was in that situation. And I felt like he got a great hold of it, and it showed up in his performance. But it was just wonderful to see him in this, place where I think, most people in Hollywood would have been like all about the opportunity to be on screen with Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, that was Kevin Connolly all the fucking way.
Yeah.
Like he was all about it. He was about going to town with Leo. He was about, putting a performance down that, could be, that proved his seat at the table, so to speak. But Scott was not interested in any of that stuff. He was really interested in trying to find the substance of, a character. And he was one of the braver guys too. Like, we actually came at him with a different character. We came at him with a transvestite. And he was like, nah, I don't want to play a transvestite. But he didn't but we had this idea that we want to introduce these elements of what we thought were, struggles for our generation that were sort of like, this that we were carrying around that really belonged to our parents, and that we were carrying around and holding on our backs that, that have in its pockets the bigotry of, our fathers and their fathers and all this other crap. So we were really into that idea of putting that on the table and saying, hey, we're not afraid of these issues and we're not afraid to talk about them and put them on display. And so when he didn't want to go full on trans, he was the one who sort of invited this opportunity to create a bisexual male character, which was unusual in certainly anything that you might want to try to push into the mainstream at that time. And so we were like, fuck, this is great, and he embraced that. So I just love all these things about Scott. I really believed, at the time, he and I were very passionate. We read a lot of the Beat generation guys, we loved, whether it was William Burroughs or Bukowski or Kerouac was one of our favorites. We used to listen to Kerouac. Actually, it was his CD collection or his, it was a CD, I think. You ever hear those Kerouac tapes of him with the blues and jazz band while he riffs, like American style haiku and stuff? Yeah, fucking great stuff, right? He introduced me to all that stuff, actually. And so, we were these passionate guys. I wrote poetry because, I would hang out with him and we would have these incredible nights, and I would go home and I would fucking write poetry afterwards, just because I felt like, that was what that we were steeping in creativity and in, just creative energy. And that was Scott, that was what he was all about. It is heartbreaking to see that he didn't find his way either. There was some of us who, we got knocked off this thing with all this nonsense from Tobey Macguire and such. So, we got knocked off this horse, and, some people couldn't get knocked off, right? Like Tobey or Leo or even Connolly for that matter, even though it took him a while to get back on. Some of us just weren't able to get back on. And it's strange to see that one of those casualties was, somebody who is and remains to this day very close to Leo.
Yeah. Well, one of the mysteries, another aspect of the horror. Okay, well, how about we go back to Jenny Lewis? We were talking about Jenny Lewis.
Yeah. And so we used that opportunity then to sort of create the separation and drift her toward Derek, where then, you know, he could feel the vibe on her, get his arm around her, and start playing with her nipples and that sort of stuff, which we didn't write.
Yeah, her reactions to that's where her character becomes much more interesting and conflicted to me when, yeah, I guess throughout. I think the character wants to be sympathetic, but the actor playing that character is insisting on bringing something else to it. And so I just love how you had to retroactively add context to meet the complexity of the performance. That's
all of it, like you know, or just story too. You know, I mean, the last line in Don's Plum is "fucking cunt," and that line is delivered by Kevin Connolly and was written after we got that improv out of he and Bethany Ashton, who played Grace Forrester. You know, so after we'd gotten that from them, then we were like, oh, so let's, and well, that's not actually true. That catalyst came from, so we had all this explosive shit happen, you know, whatever it was, a week or a few days before we were shooting, between Amber and Leo wanting to replace her. So we go through all this, and we jump through these hoops to make it work for all parties and to help the film. And we get this performance out of Amber Benson. So all of that Jeep smashing shit. So here's a horror story for you.
Yeah.
We have a production designer. We had a production designer called Louis Traby III. He was our production designer. And so I wrote the Jeep being smashed. It was a really funny little dialogue between me and the producing team. As we were cutting, I was writing, and I wrote the scene where she destroys the Jeep, and they were like, we can't afford that. And I'm like, well, she's being fucking destroyed at the table, and she needs now to seek some revenge, and that revenge has to be Jeremy's Jeep. That's the only thing that might make fucking sense. So I'm fighting for it, and then John Schindler comes up with the creative idea of just replacing the windshield of the Jeep and possibly the taillights. So that'll work, right? Now that Jeep belongs to our production designer. So we call up our production designer and say, hey, can we get your Jeep again for these reshoots months later? And he's like, yeah, that's no problem. Well, we didn't tell him what we were doing with it. We just got the Jeep. So we take the Jeep, we replaced his windscreen with a one that we purchased, and we replaced the tail lens caps with ones we had purchased. And then we started teaching Amber Benson how to swing a bat and break those things, right? So we film it, and it's in the film as you've seen it, right? We smashed those glasses, all that glass and all sort of stuff. So Louis had no idea. We get the car detailed, we clean it up, we replace the windscreen with his, no harm, no foul. We return his Jeep to him. We never hurt his Jeep one iota, right? We never touched his Jeep with the bat. And then we cut to, you know, this MGM screening for cast and crew, and of course Louis is attending that screening. And so for the first time, to his horror, he watches his Jeep getting smashed by a chick with a bat. And so after the screening, he eventually catches up to me, and he's laughing, and he says, he's like, I was pulling little cubes of glass out of my fucking Jeep for months. And he was like, I couldn't figure out where the hell it was coming from. And he's like, what is going on? He's like, it was just absolutely baffling. And he's like, I never even thought that it had to do with the shoot, because you guys just borrowed my Jeep and returned it. Everything looked normal. But for months, he was pulling glass out of it. So how funny is that?
That's a Hollywood horror story. It could happen to you folks. You don't know where.
But we wrote, exactly. So we wrote all this shit retroactively. I wrote the Jeep smashing retroactively, which led to then, you know, Jeremy's last line. All of that stuff was, was dynamic. And I think I've probably gotten off topic, and if I have, I apologize.
No, we're talking about the film Don's Plum, so you're not off topic at all. This brings us to my more I guess in some ways my most personal connection to the film, in that that Don is played by Byron Thames, who used to play in bands when my band would play with his, and that was how I got to know Jerry Medders. Part of this scene that feels a lot. That's my closest connection. Just the energy of being in a band that's playing clubs in Hollywood in the mid '90s, and acting in movies, and has people who are in the bands who are also in movies, and some of them are becoming very famous, and some of them are becoming local famous, and some of them are becoming whatever they become. But seeing Byron Thames show up in this film blew my mind, and so I'm kind of curious, how did he get into this film?
Well, Bethany Ashton brought both him and Stephanie Cambridge, who played Flo, and we weren't sure. We kind of all these these smaller roles. Many of them were being cast as friends. I played a homeless dude with Ethan Suplee, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, you're the guy with that's one with your pants. You're the one whose pants can't stay up.
That's me. That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
Well played.
Yeah.
Well done,
thank
sir.
you.
That's a great scene.
So it's a fun scene, and all credit goes to Jenna Lewis on that one too. She was just so remarkable in every way in this movie. Like that reaction, just when we saw that, and not only that, but our crew, our camera for capturing that push on her, that gorgeous zoom in on her while she's mortified by my character lying sprawled out drunk on the floor while Leah's trying to get me up off of it, is just. What a shot, man. It made the whole thing. Jenny Lewis is just, again, I think she was a generational talent. There was not a single moment of her performance that she didn't, give everything, every consideration, the detail that she would put in to every scene. And it came to her, I think, intuitively, probably much the same way her music did. I mean, I used to hang out with her and Blake with some frequency back in the day, and I saw them working together musically often. They even sang a song I participated in writing at one point, and it was a silly song, and I'm glad they stopped singing it. But nonetheless, I was witness to this, and I'm sorry to go off on it, but it's one of the so what people don't know, and here's want to talk about more. I got more horror for you. Don's Plum was destroyed in a single evening by Tobey Maguire, and what happened was Tobey Maguire showed up at our house in a fit, screaming from the top of his lungs that he wanted Don's Plum to burn. And this was after Don's Plum had screened for Leo, and we got picked up by CAA, and we had distributors lined up for the movie, and everything was just in great shape. Leo was on board. There was everything was just in great shape. And Tobey actually had been out of town shooting probably the Ang Lee movie, but something like that in New York. He'd finally come back home to all of this fanfare about Don's Plum, because he'd only seen a 72-minute cut that did not have all that Toledo Diamond footage and any of the subsequent writing. All he had seen was the stuff that we had shot in those first 3 days, cut together in a pretty strong cut at that point. And then he was off to New York to work with Woody Allen or somebody. And so when he returned to Los Angeles, we had already screened the film for Leo and for Leo's agents. And, we had just moved on with the film, and the film was on a trajectory to have art house success. And for whatever reason, I have theories, but no one really knows. He freaked out and he wanted this film gone. And so he shows up on our doorstep screaming he wants to burn the film down. And I spent the entire day and into the next morning, and by into the next morning, I mean all the way until 7 or 8 o'clock the next morning. So over 12 or 13 hours of trying to calm him down. He was out of his mind. And he eventually, how do I put this? He said that I confessed that we, meaning Jerry Metters, Artie, Robb, and myself, had an agreement to pit the press against Leonardo DiCaprio if Leonardo DiCaprio didn't participate in and support the release of Don's Plum. It's an absolute fabrication. You would, of course, never hear Jerry Metters or Artie Robb in any way admit to something like that would be a stupid thing because it didn't exist. And confessing it to Tobey on the eve of my success would be as dumb gets. So I didn't say anything like that, but I did, and we don't need to get into these details necessarily here. And it's something that I think the book goes into at length enough for there to be, a great deal of definition behind it all, but and detail into the conversation that he and I had, because it lasted for fucking 8 hours. But needless to say, he took statements that I made and he twisted them into this conspiracy that he brought to Leonardo DiCaprio. And it was so effective and so horrible to Leo. And this was at a time when Leo felt very vulnerable to the press. He felt like his career depended on how he was being portrayed by them or how he might be portrayed by them. And so he was very fearful of how they might, if they might we've all seen what the press can do. In the 90s, it even had more power because there wasn't social media to stop any of them or to check any of them. In the 90s, and this particularly the early 90s or midline 90s, as you said, movie stars and just sort of celebrity talent, and they were susceptible, and he was afraid of that. And so when Tobey brought him this news, this idea that we were going to do such a thing, Leo, it fractured our friendships and our relationships irreparably, obviously, and it's never been the same. But that all took place in a single day, and so and from that day, Leo was quickly becoming the most powerful kid in Hollywood. At that time, he was on the second phase of shooting Titanic. There was this big, long first phase of Titanic. Then they had to get a whole bunch more financing, and he was on hiatus at this actual time when he saw Don's Plum, and when the dispute broke out between us. After that, he went and returned and shot the last bit of Titanic, and we all know what happened when that film got released. But prior to that, he was still being touted as the next great thing, and so on and so forth, and he had a great deal of power. When Tobey brought him this, that's when Leo decided that he was going to destroy Don's Plum, and me and RD along with it. And if you want to talk about a horror story, you brought this up at the beginning, and I don't think we got into it, man. I woke up the day after that to a life completely changed, and it's something that I don't think a lot of people have experienced. It's one of the most horrifying things I think anyone can go through, who is involved in something, involved in a sort of deep social existence. I had a lot of friends, the so-called posse, all of them very close. We used the words "I love you, bro" when we meant them, and we were inseparable. And I woke up the next day, and all that was gone. But it didn't stop there. It penetrated most of Hollywood. There was literally no party I could go to anymore where I wasn't shunned or shamed in some way, where the energy wasn't, could some of it have been coming from me? Sure, of course, absolutely. I was so completely fucking damaged at that point, because once Leo turned on us, every offer was pulled. The entire movie was ultimately destroyed. And all of our dreams, everything we'd ever dreamed of and worked for, were destroyed. And it wasn't limited, unfortunately, to just Don's Plum. As I said, in 2014, I was still faced with it. So, that's a horror story that I think few people really truly understand. I get a lot of, or particularly not so much now, but particularly before I started educating the public through a lot of my own personal publicity, working, doing interviews with New York Post or, like the Projection Booth and others. Like, I've worked very hard doing a lot of interviews, like when we're having now, quite frankly, to try and tell the true story about Don's Plum and the demise of Don's Plum. Because I don't think people understand that it wasn't just the film. There was such a catastrophic loss on every level of my life and Artie Robb's life. It ultimately destroyed our lives. And I think, we're now both kind of recovering, and I think that started a lot when I began to call for the healing, when I began telling the truth and speaking the truth about what happened at Don's Plum. Because if there's a dispute about any particular intellectual property as you're making that property, and especially if you're doing it loosely with friends, experimentally, etc., if there are all these circumstances which create space between agreements, or however you want to phrase it, or create it in a mental situation, there are other remedies than the complete and total destruction of everybody's work that was involved. And I get particularly passionate about this because one of the horror stories for me is the horror story of Jenny Lewis's acting career. I'm happy for her and her fans for what she's done and contributed to the world musically. And I've enjoyed a lot of it. I've gone and seen her without her even knowing on more than one occasion. I'm a fan of Jenny Lewis's on every level. And I believe that they took away from the world, many future performances from her. And I suppose everyone's okay with that because Jenny Lewis went on to continue, went on to bring us so much other great work. But that wasn't the case for RD or I. That wasn't the case for Jerry in terms of what he's truly capable of. He put some things out, but Jerry was capable of so much more than he actually ended up accomplishing. And the only reason he wasn't able to accomplish that was because of what these men decided to do to us in Hollywood. There's no more a horror story than that, than waking up one day after one fucking day. You know, Leo didn't take 2 weeks, a month. He didn't like, hey, let's sit down and talk about it. Let's talk it out. Let's hear what everyone has to say. Let's look at all these supposed claims and examine them against actual facts and see what holds up. And then if it does hold up, find remedies that don't punish Jenny Lewis and Meadow, Sisto, and Byron, Thames, and Stephanie Cambridge. And, if you want to punish Dale Wheatley, come after me. If you want to punish Robb, go after him. Jerry Mitters, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was really one of the big. I'm sorry to explode it up in this way and in this direction, but I think that as we get into the horror stories of Don's Plum, there's a lot going on, as far as our struggles artistically within the movie, within our characters, and how things played out dynamically in that respect. But the real horror story of Don's Plum is that a beautiful work of art was created. Whether you love it or you hate it or you're indifferent, it doesn't matter. It's still a beautiful work of art. It stood the test of time, and it was destroyed over nonsense and for the use and purpose of one person. And it's that part of the record that I want known throughout the fucking universe. Don's Plum deserved to be the film that people to be a part of a 90s renaissance of independent film. There's so much different weird peripheral damage to Don's Plum, like damage you wouldn't expect. Like Don's Plum is not a 2001 film. It's just not. It's not a part of and it doesn't feel right when I see it. When I see it with the film, it doesn't. My work in the 2000s was supposed to be vastly different and more sophisticated and grown and matured as I grew and matured. But Don's Plum was a part of my 20s. Don's Plum was a part of Leo's 20s. It had nothing to fucking do with the 2000s. I was a different man in the 2000s as I am today in now this decade and in this century. So you know what I mean? Like, this is the fucking the nuclear bomb that was dropped on our heads, And it's taken me 20 fucking years to put myself back together. And I'm finally strong. I finally have a strong voice. I can go on for as long as I have right now, for example. I'm very strong now. But it was a lot of rubble to climb out from underneath. It was like a sentencing. It was like an execution of my creative self. There was just so much that happened, and witnessing it and all the others around me and the effect that it had, the burn that it had on so many others, not just the direct hit like me, R.D. and Jerry, but even people like Bethany Ashton and others who I think would have benefited. I mean, you look at Kevin Connolly's career, it was 7 or 9 years or something, or 6 or 7 or 8, 9 years after Don's Plum before he got any actual action. And when you look at his performance in Don's Plum, there can be no doubt about what would have happened to him if that was released in the 90s theatrically. There can be no fucking doubt about what would have happened to that man's career from that movie. And by the way, it's heartbreaking because when you get into to Kevin Connolly, the person, which is all backed up, by the way, by his own testimony and his depositions, all Kevin Connolly wanted for Kevin Connolly was a feature film career. And you and I both know that back in the 90s, TV wasn't prestigious. Right. TV was where the shit landed, right? It was where bad actors or actors who were finished ended up. It wasn't where actors began, or it might be where they began in guest spots.
Or where young actors begin on their way to film careers.
Right, but everyone's right. No, everyone wanted to be a movie star.
Kevin Connolly was cheesy as fuck for a long time, and then he got to be an Entourage, which for a moment was cool, and now everyone hates. And he probably made really good money, but you're right. If this film had come out and it had been him and Tobey Maguire and Leonardo DiCaprio as these young actors in this film that comes out of this soup that P.T. Anderson and Quentin Tarantino are coming out of, he has a different film career. Absolutely.
Completely.
You know what I wanted to say, just to give you some idea, just of like the downstream damage. And this is something that I've only realized as I've discovered it more. Like I say, I have a great fondness for this film, and in general for everyone who participated in it, for even their mistakes. Our show is The World Is Wrong, and it's extremely positive podcast where we celebrate films the world is wrong about.
And I love that, and I'm so glad that we get a chance to celebrate what's positive about Don's Plum, because there sure is a lot.
Right, but Jerry Metters was one of my strongest allies in Hollywood. as he is from very early in my time in Hollywood. He saw something with my band and was very supportive of scenes we were a part of. He included us in all these events, and he knew me as an actor as well. He did all kinds of, he was always one of my great allies in the business. And kneecapping Jerry Medders didn't do me any favors. So even well downstream, and to not make it just selfish,
I mean, you are making.
I'm aware of. Let me just say that there's a whole community of people that I was a part of at that time, that Byron Thames and Dan Byrne and Randy Kaplan and I could just go on and on with amazing people who were part of that scene and that world. And Jerry was an ally to all of us. And he did put all of his resources into this thing to make it beautiful. And yeah, there are down, and I think this is one of the things that I wish people would talk about more in the sort of dissection of dissecting the power dynamics that the Me Too movement sort of pulled the lid off of to the degree that it did, is that there are all kinds of impacts to allowing bullies to reign free, be they male or female or whatever. Bullies in general have a lot of downstream impact that go beyond just the people the sort of obvious victims. So there is that's the horror is so intense that as I'm exploring this, I'm realizing, oh, wait a second, I am also a victim of this film. And that's part of what makes it great. Actually, that's part of what gives it that Zapruder film factor of like, this film reveals more than you could possibly have intended. And I think that's where I kind of want to bring this as we come to the end of our conversation, which is I went through those times and maybe and went through similar experiences. And I know that film, especially the way you're talking about doing it, can be a really, I don't want to get too woo-woo, but a shamanic or a magical experience that, like a magic trick, like kids playing with magic, you don't know what kind of energies you're going to scare up. And I'm kind of curious, aside from everything else, you've had this amazing journey because of this film. It's made you the person you are. It's hard for me to hear you say it destroyed the film because I watched it last night. The film is still totally there and you're still totally here. And I'm kind of curious, after having gone through all of this, what's your take on what the magic trick or the ritual of Don's Plum has meant for you personally?
Well, Don's Plum was like the biggest discovery of who I was as a talent. Don's Plum was my first feature film, but it was my first film where I had any kind of major creative role. And so Don's Plum is just the most one of the most. I love this because. When people think about movie magic, they think about, special effects. They think about, CGI. They think about, sleight of hand. They think about magic, and as woo-woo as it sounds, and I don't really care because I'll tell you that when I've developed a lot of properties since then, and I've consulted a lot of people on making their first film, and I'm actually creating some I'm in the process of exploring the creation of some materials on how to help people produce a quality first film. Because to me, there is something metaphysical that happens when you prepare material artistically to a certain extent. Look, musicians have these great moments of like divine intervention, and I think that happens to writers as well. I think it's happened to me where these moments, these ideas, these thoughts, these dialogues, whatever it might be, they come to you, and if you're able to capture them, whether it's you've got an instrument close by and you're able to get the melody, or you've got the lyric, the hook, the whatever it might be, you're able to get it down. And just enough so that little seed is now planted. And if you could care for it, nurture it, or at least ignore it long enough for it to sprout on its own, that you might have an opportunity to nurture into something that almost becomes an organic, living fucking creature. And I tell this to people that I work with when I consult with them on their films. There's a point that you get to creatively where it becomes its own thing, where it separates itself from you, the creator, and from those around it who are going to be its actors or whatever it is, and whatever role they might play as a part of making it. They're separated from it. They're not it. They don't drive it. It's driving them. And I believe that to be true because I've witnessed it. Don's Plum should have never fucking happened. And that's why it got taken away. It got taken away because it scared people, because it shouldn't have fucking happened. We weren't supposed to be able to make a film that could have that kind of emotional impact, and that could have that much social commentary, and that could have that much potential staying power in 2 days. And the only reason it happened wasn't because Robb is a genius or because I'm a genius, or because we were in the presence of the great prodigal fucking actor, Scott Bloom.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe it happened because we were able to nurture those relationships and nurture the work and believe in it and surrender to it completely and fully, so much so that we had no care for ourselves. Right. And then from that, it took over. It became what it is today. And it called from us what it needed, and we gave it to it willingly and voluntarily. And then maybe when it was over, some of us felt violated by that. But that's what I believe in. I believe in that woo-woo shit because I've witnessed it, because Don's Plum shouldn't have fucking happened. I am talented. I am a good writer. When you read my book, you will fucking enjoy it. Of course I'm talented. I can't be a part of something and contribute to something like that without being able to hold it up. But what I did was hold it up. You're not going to believe this. I'm getting a call. Are you there?
Yeah.
I'm getting a call from Edie Robb. That is Artie Robb's mother.
Do you want to take it?
Do you want to hold on?
Yeah.
Hold on.
Radio 8 Ball.
Andras here. When I'm not co-hosting The World is Wrong podcast, I'm hosting and producing the Radio 8 Ball podcast, where we answer questions by picking songs at random, like picking musical tarot cards. We've hosted musical divinations for people like John C. Reilly, Patricia Arquette, Tig Notaro, and Fred Armisen, and hosted over 200 songwriters, providing the randomly chosen answers from Inara George and Dan Byrne to Mose Allison and Alan Toussaint. That's Radio 8 Ball, all one word. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and download our app from the iTunes App Store.
Andras?
Yes. Is everything okay? Is everything okay?
Everything's fine.
Okay, good.
Everything is fine.
Good.
Everything was fine. Actually, it was a mistake. She didn't mean to call. But I'll tell you, it's not a mistake. It's an interesting thing because here I mean, it is, right? But here we are. And she and I are estranged. We've been estranged. The last time I heard from her was while I've been fighting for freeing Don's Plum and for, getting things right. She wrote me an email, and it was a terrible email. And it goes back to when, with this whole thing between me and Tobey, and how Tobey took my words and destroyed Don's Plum with them. And I totally agree with you that Don's Plum is not destroyed, but that was his intent. And it was the feeling overall. I think it still is the feeling amongst many others that Don's Plum is a destroyed film because it just never reached its potential. But I digress. The last thing she wrote me was, please leave my son alone. Everything you touch turns to shit, or something to that horrible effect. It was devastating. And this came because Free Don's Plum blew up. I had written this open letter to Leonardo DiCaprio, got picked up by The Guardian, and then there was a domino effect. It got picked up by all these news outlets, and it led to all these different articles and so on and so forth. And so it opened up these old wounds, which is actually not true because I had been hanging out with RD extensively in 2010 and beyond, and the wounds were not closed. they were wide open, gushing, and they still really are ultimately, because it's unfinished business. Our film is unfinished. But anyway, so it was an accident. She called, but we somehow reconnected. And during that moment, you have so Andras, you have this thing, right? Where you have this like positive vibe, and you want things to be positive, and you want to infuse the world with certain positivity, even when it on its face it may not seem so. Well, I've been estranged with that woman for years, and it hurts me on a regular basis. She's extremely old, and I've actually recently been going through a lot of fear of losing her without ever being able to hear her voice again, because I love her dearly. And it's been something I've been dealing with because I'm a divorcee, and my former father-in-law, whom I also loved dearly, passed away. My divorce didn't go well, and I was estranged from the family. And a lot of this, by the way, affected by Don's Plum. She was there during the Don's Plum era, and it was really a strain on our relationship, really all the way to the end. But he passed, and I had to mourn alone, and it felt terrible. And I was going through this fear of having that with Edie. And I also, because I had heard Walt's voice again before he died, years had passed, but he was, it's a long story about why we didn't talk, but it wasn't because we didn't love each other. And I never heard his voice. And so when he died, I just cried so hard and mourned so heavy for just losing that. And, you come into my life, I'm in this moment where I'm like on the mount, right? I'm on the fucking mount about, you struck this beautiful chord about why or how films, are bigger than we who make them. And I got really passionate about that. And I don't know, man, fucking reached across.
The magic works. The magic trick doesn't end. It really
and then
is
she shows up.
magic with
great.
a K.
That's the craziest one.
Yeah.
Super magical moment for me just now happened in your interview. So I just, it was super magical. And she just said, let's keep in touch. And I'm going to write her an email. And, she doesn't know this because here's what's going to happen. And this is so perfect for me and her, right? Because, Don's Plum blew up and we were a little estranged after that. I mean, we went through the lawsuit and we worked hard, but, things weren't the same between me and Robb. And then we got back together and we love each other and we reconciled. And I even moved back to Los Angeles after my marriage broke up, and I worked with her and Artie Robb and Station 3, and we're doing all this great stuff, and we're making these cool shows, and we're developing all these cool projects, and we're in love again, and everything's great. And then Hollywood, and it kind of rears its ugly head again, and things kind of get bad. So we decided to move on. And we break up, and then whatever, it comes cycling back around. I had a better point, and I talked myself out of it.
Well, while we're in the blast zone of that synchronicity, talk to me about your relationship with Artie Robb.
Artie and I met through Artie Robb. Was like a creative soulmate for me. It was one of those immediate situations where like he trusted me creatively and I relied on him to bring me notes and to kind of guide me as a writer, and he's done that over the years, like through other projects. He's got this great creative ability to help you through your process, whether you're a writer or maybe even another director, or maybe you're an actor. Artie can really help you through your own process, and it's a wild thing. It's an unconsciously competent skill that he has. It's not one that I'm not even sure he's aware of it, frankly. But we had this great chemistry, and I met him through our friends. Jeremy Sisto was sort of the catalyst or the sort of gatekeeper to all these guys and introduced me to everybody. I auditioned for a short film that Artie was going to direct with Leo called Last Respects. I failed miserably at it, and I had heard. Well, I'll tell you an interesting story, right? So, people who know Don's Plum or know the history of Don's Plum, they'll know about a film called Last Respects. It was a short film that was sort of the first project that we were all going to do together, and it's the one that creates the confusion around whether Don's Plum is a short and a feature, frankly. When it was being filmed, or whether it's the sort of the lore that's out there today. But there was this short. It was called Last Respects, and I auditioned for a role, and I did so bad, Andras. I don't know how many auditions you have bombed in your life. I have bombed every one of them I've ever been on, and there weren't many because I realized that auditioning was just not something I was probably going to be good at without really abandoning, I don't know. I don't know how I could ever get over it. But anyway, I bombed on this particular audition, and this audition was actually a table read with the entire cast, which included Leo. But it was at this audition that I bombed that I overheard Leonardo DiCaprio say to Robb that he couldn't make the film Last Respects because the script was too bad. And I had been a writer my whole life, so I've been writing lyrics and poems and short stories and all kinds of shit. And I knew I'd completely blown this audition, and I heard this problem. Leo didn't like the script. And so, and I'd actually traveled to the audition with RD. RD drove me to the audition. And so I was driving with him from it. And he was obviously very disappointed because Leo said he couldn't make the film or wouldn't make the film unless the script got way better. And I just offered my services, man. I said, like, I can write, maybe I can help. And so a couple of weeks after that, we kind of got together and did a little chemistry thing. Can we pull it off or not? And we just went to the moon real quick, creatively. We just started bouncing ideas off. And I know I have a talent for dialogue. And so I'm able to really create cool and interesting scenarios and tension between characters quickly. And it's sort of a great, beginning in many instances for collaboration in scenes. And, Robb was the creative love of my life from the time I got to Los Angeles until Don's Plum blew up in all of our faces. I thought that Robb and I were going to be, I thought we had the potential to be a duo that people talked about. I thought we were going to be, a poor man's Coen brothers. He was going to write and direct, and I was going to write and produce, and together we were going to do those three jobs and make some really funky and interesting movies that people might talk about for a while. That was Robb. He and I, our friendship endured so much pain, I told you earlier about how when one of the horrors of all this was waking up that morning after the fallout, and after Leonardo DiCaprio declared basically our deaths, sentenced us to death. That morning I woke up and it was just so horrible to wake up and not have any friends. Like, we lost 95% of our friends to the extent that they wouldn't even take our calls. And that was literally the next day. I mean, it was such a strange and weird Twilight Zone-like moment. But there was Robb, and still not only a friend, but my best friend. And so our friendship endured that, and we endured a lot more. I remember a very sad moment. We were sitting at what we refer to as the mansion, which is now Danny Masterson's house on Holly Ridge in Franklin Village. And that's where we cut Don's Plum. And it's Chuck Berry's old mansion, actually. And it was an old dilapidated mansion by the time we were working on it. It had this big grand balcony, and on it we sat, RD and I, after all of this shit had gone down. And I was just sitting there, tears were just rolling down my cheeks. And I looked at him and I said, I'm sorry, because, this all started to fall apart around me, and I was in the center of it all. And RD said, he didn't really respond, but I looked up at him and said, I don't know how, I don't know when, but Don's probably going to have its day. And I just, that day never left me. That moment never left me, because it was, our dreams were shattered right there around our ankles. It was just like, we could just see the destruction of our lives just almost like laid out right in front of us. The sadness was just, it was tangible. And I just remember sharing that with him and just realizing how deep our connection was, and how much, I don't know, you go through things with some people that I think kind of brand you, friends forever. But look, in the end, for me, if you know, I'm 51 years old. It's gotten to the point now in my life where I'm thinking a little bit about posterity. I'm still young enough to, you know, continue to work and grow. I'm writing like crazy. I'm sort of, I would say I'm 90% back to where I was creatively at the end of making Don's Plum. At the end of Don's Plum, I was blooming. I was ready to have my 4, 5, 6 film run. I felt it. My ideas were spot on. I just had a fire and an intuition and a drive that was supernatural, and I was ready to go with it. And whatever it produced, you know, and then, you know, a lot of people take this sort of, you know, this hyperbole as some kind of, you know, maybe misplaced or misguided confidence, but it isn't. You know, it's an artistic process, and I was doing special work at the time, and there's just no denying that. It's just living in the reality of what we were doing. You know, it doesn't have to be special work that everyone appreciates. I've seen plenty of films that people love that I didn't, and I've seen a lot of films that I love that plenty people don't. So it always boils down to taste and or even maybe your mood at the time. But when it comes down to the actual like function and the work, you know, that's when, you know, we sort of separate ourselves from as people and artists, and there was no question where we were at that time collectively and where I was individually. And I'm finally getting back to that. So I just feel like it's been a climb back. But I think the thing I want most people to know and to realize about Don's Plum is that Don's Plum is simply a film that was cut together. You know, there's this propaganda out there about Don's Plum being, you know, flipped from a short into a feature and all this nonsense, and it's degraded the image of a movie that was simply, we simply cut together the movie we shot, nothing more than that. We made the movie we set out to make, and we did that without, and we didn't set out to make the movie with a particular set of expectations. We certainly wanted to make the best movie possible. That was the only true expectation out of any of it. We didn't have any theatrical attributions. We didn't have any theatrical aspirations. We didn't have any, we dreamed like everybody dreamed in Hollywood in the 90s. We'd love to be at Sundance. We'd love to be at Cannes. We'd love to be at Berlin. But it wasn't what drove us. What drove us was the content and the meaning of the content and the characters and the opportunity. And that was a big part of this for us, was that, you know, we recognized that we had a really special cast, and, you know, you don't throw that opportunity away. You don't minimize that opportunity. You have to, you know, that's where you just, I think you have to, you know, as Nigel put it, I think it was Nigel in Spinal Tap, where you have to turn that shit up to 11, you know?
That's what you do when you're 25 and you're making movies.
That's right. Our inspiration for Don's Plum and for that whole methodology, approach, was from Mike Leigh, if you're familiar with him.
Very much so.
And yeah, he's one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. And he was the only filmmaker that I knew of at the time that was working entirely improvisationally.
Can I ask you a question quickly? Have you seen Peterloo yet?
No.
I know, it's on my list. I haven't seen it yet. Okay, go on.
No, I was thinking about it yesterday because Happy Go Lucky is leaving in September. Happy Go Lucky is leaving HBO Max, and I was like, oh, I gotta go see what you call it. So anyway, but yeah, so it was Mike Leigh that sort of inspired us, and I wanted to take sort of steps towards a more dramatic narrative. But yeah, I don't even know what the negative is. You know, it's like we're, you know, I in these last 5 years, I was able to get a hold of the Berlin print, get it into Photocam, get that thing transcoded into a 2K. So now I have a 2K. So I have a what do you call it? A cinema file, a DCP. Mm-hmm. So I've got a digital cinema copy of the film now, which didn't exist beforehand. I'm able to distribute the film in HD. That wasn't able to happen before. So I'm in this like current process of preserving the film. And, you know, so those masters are worth everything, all my Nagros and all of our assets. I don't even know what's there. Hundreds of thousands of feet of film, hundreds of thousands of feet. It's crazy. Yeah.
Well, that's what's going to, honestly, that's one of those things. That's what's going to keep it interesting. You know, you try and hide the document, it just makes it sacred. So
it does, and it's a weird thing because Don's Plum would have been gone by now, and been beloved, but it would have been gone.
Yeah. Well, buried under the weight of the the work that you all would do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Later.
It's our mean streets. It's our mean streets. A lot of people used to freak out about that. They'd be like, "Oh, you think it's such a fucking masterpiece?" And I'm like, "No, dude, it was my first film. It just wasn't supposed to be my last one. That's all." I have carried for more than 20 years the burden of people believing that it was me who destroyed Don's Plum, and that meant that I took away the performances of Jenny Lewis and Meadow Sisto and every other cast member, Byron Thames, and that's a devastating thing to carry. And so part of my mission is to redeem that, even though I know that I personally didn't, do anything to try and interfere with or interrupt their career in any other way. I feel a certain responsibility to let people see how great they were in this movie, because they're stunning. They're truly stunning.
Yeah, well, it's true. That is the truth. It's funny because when it all gets worked out and everything's fine, I'll be the guy still doing a podcast and saying, but you haven't seen the real version. Unless you've seen Tobey Macguire talk about ass play, you've not seen the real version of this movie. It's part of the key. Like,
your listeners are coming for it.
Yeah,
they're coming for that. They're like, "Give me that version, bro. I don't want no Dale Wheatley Berlin cut."
No, I want to see what they really set them off. I want to see the original Zapruder film, before the CIA got a hold of it.
Yeah, right. Of course you do.
Yeah, I want to see that. That's what we want to see. Anyway, that'll be so. Luckily, the world will always be wrong for people like me.
You're a ton of fun, man. I've done a bunch of these now, and Mike White at the projection booth was a ton of fun. I've never listened to that interview because I suspected that they wouldn't be so kind to Don's Plum, and I just don't subject myself to that. So I have no idea. In fact, I thought I had a bad interview, but he assured me that it was great.
Oh, your interview was great. It's uncomfortable because you are so genuine and great, and their take on it, they don't meet the film where it is. That's why we do this podcast. Not because there's anything wrong with that, but we're artists and we view art from an art's sake, and there's no value to be gleaned from saying, "Oh, this film isn't good on this level because they're not doing what I would do." Like, who cares? It's an unimportant opinion. And I've been on the projection booth, and I love the projection booth. It's one of my favorite podcasts. And in fact, one of the reasons I started a podcast was because I wanted to be involved in those conversations. So that I could represent this point of view as one point of view. But yeah, you came off great, and they kind of came off as dicks. But I felt like in the end, this is why Mike's great. I feel like in the end, he saw that that's what it was. And I feel like even in their closing commentary that he made a mention of it, of like, I wish I had interviewed him before we talked, because I would have seen the film differently. So it actually came out good. Like, he did a good job, but it was frustrating to listen to as a fan. But you did come off great. So.
Well, I was actually mentioning it just because, and I would say part of the reason why I may have come off so well is because of, the way he conducted the interview. I've had bad interviews. I've had interviews where I've begged people, please don't put them out. And fortunately, so far they haven't, because, a lot of it has to do with, like, I think the world you create. I mean, like that Edie Robb call is, I literally switched over from you, and I heard her voice, and her voice is a very distinct voice. She sounds like a dude. She's like, "Hello," and I said, "Hello," and she's like, "Who is this?" And I said, "This is Dale Wheatley," and she's like, "Oh, I didn't mean to call you." But upon hearing her voice, which is dear to me and so unique, tears just flooded my eyes. So there was this, like, I just had a surreal moment in my life. And I think that you created this opportunity. And so what I'm trying to say is that, I had a really great time tonight, and I think that that's because of you. I really like, what you bring to the table, and I do, and I love this. And it's so great that you've come into my life in this respect, because I've gone through this mental health transformation. It's been a lot of hard work. but I've emerged out of it now with this incredibly healthy perspective. Still very determined and angry for what's happened to me and to my film, but very determined and healthy and strong. And I just, I'm in a great place to receive the kind of vibes that you're given. I think if you'd have interviewed me a year ago, you'd been like, okay, let's just scrap that episode unless we want to change this to something morbid and shitty. So I've it's just like I'm at this point in my life where a guy like you and the vibes that you bring, are not only good for the film and for the messages that we have, but good for me personally.
Hi, I'm Brian.
And I'm AJ.
And we have a podcast called The Director's Wall,
examining a filmmaker's career, film by film. First up was M. Night Shyamalan, then Francis Ford Coppola. Who's next? Is there anything to this whole auteur theory? Find out on
The Director's Wall.
Subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or your preferred listening platform.
Hi, everybody. Sorry to interrupt this show that you're probably enjoying, but I'm comedian Kevin Dombrowski, who you probably don't know. Joined weekly by my producer, Adam, a little bit more well-known than me, Hineker. Say hi, Adam.
True, he's got a point.
Dial it back. Each episode, I'll sit down with a very famous comedian that you probably do know, and if they're not famous, you probably know them anyway, and we'll break down what's happening in the world by making fun of all of it. This is Just Joking on the Paper House Network. No interviews, no arguments, just jokes. Now, back to your show that you were already enjoying.
Dear listener, if you are just discovering our podcast, you can find all of our episodes on our website at theworldiswrongpodcast.com. You can also write to us at contact@theworldiswrongpodcast.com or follow us on Instagram at theworldiswrongpodcast. And now, back to the show.
That was a long talk. That was a good talk.
Thank you.
That, dare I say, I think that's one of the best interviews that you've done for this show. I think that was really great.
Really? Thank you.
Yeah, I was kind of expecting it to be like a hate fest, but it wasn't. It was more of a bittersweet fest. It was more of a let's just get this movie seen by people fest. And like it didn't. It was sort of I was thinking it was going to be a lot of condemnation, but it wasn't. There's a little bit there, which is good, but it was actually more a celebration of this movie, which I think is what it needs. Because I think so much of the talk of this movie gets wrapped up in the behind the scenes, which I think doesn't do justice to the actual movie that exists. And it's nice for the people who made this movie, like him, that you can actually get to hear about just the movie and what you think about the movie, apart from just the behind the scenes stuff. Like it's there, but it's good just to talk about the movie too.
Well, I want to hear what you think about the movie. But before we do, I need to make one correction or just I'll give one piece of information we left out of that. So the woman who plays the heavyset black woman who gets mocked mercilessly by Leonardo DiCaprio's character, that actor's name is Phyllis Brooks Daniels. Phyllis Brooks Daniels. So bravo to Ms. Phyllis Brooks Daniels for that performance in the film.
Isn't it nice that we're doing these outros later so that you have time to listen to it a million times and make these corrections? Man, you'd be a great grade school teacher.
My family are teachers. Yeah.
Correcting papers, letting people know. Like, I bet that you're the type of person that if someone says something grammatically incorrect, that you correct them immediately. Am I right?
Generally,
you seem like that type of person. Which is fine. I have no problem with that type of person.
I also tell someone if their fly's open or if they have broccoli in their
food
teeth.
On their face. Yeah, that's. I think that's good. You're helping these people out. It may seem embarrassing in the moment, but ultimately you're saving them from way more embarrassment. Or way more mistakes.
I'll tell you, I've never regretted doing that, but there are things in my life that I still carry with me where I remember I was swimming with someone and her boob came out of her bathing suit and I was too embarrassed to say anything about it. And then when she found out, she was really embarrassed. And this is like 35 years ago. And I'm still carrying it around.
You have to say something.
Had the guts to just say, hey,
Yeah. There's a polite way to do it. You can like be looking away, looking up, and be like, "Oh, sorry," you have it, and just kind of motion.
I mean, I was
sorry. There's a thing.
I was like 16 or 17 years old, and it was an adult woman, so I think it was also just like, yeah.
Benny Hill movie.
Yeah.
But see, the other day there was a man at work that had his fly down. I didn't say anything because I'm the opposite. I get so scared and embarrassed to tell people these things, so I just don't.
Oh, jeez.
I'm just sort of like, there's a booger out your nose. This is not my problem. I can't deal with this. I can't stop thinking about it, but I'm not going to be the one to point out. I'm just going to walk away. Like, I just don't want to get involved. So that's me. But then I'm the person
that's
too.
Really what you want from a director. That's what you want from your director. They're not. I'm not going to tell him that he looks.
You know what? I guess this character has his fly down. That's who the character is now. This is what's happening.
Oh, you need it. That's why you need a first AD, man. You need a first AD who's a real asshole.
The bad guy. They're the bad guy. Yeah, being like, in that scene when you were crying, some boogers came out. We got to do it again. The director doesn't want to tell you, but that's what happened.
Yeah, you're like a David Lynch type. Come over here. Get that booger out of there.
Anyways,
send the booger wrangler.
All right, we're not even in the episode. Let's go back to
And now we've been waiting the whole time. Listeners have been listening. They've been listening to me and Dale talk and just thinking, yeah, but what does Brian think of this film?
I really like this period of films. Like, I mean, maybe because it's when I grew up. Like I'm a kid of the 90s, and that's when I fell in love with movies truly, and just that whole kind of like 90s wave of indie cinema is so thrilling to me. And I think even the ones that don't work, I'm excited about. And this movie, I feel like there's definitely some parts where the filmmaking's a little clunky, but it's a first movie, and you can forgive that. And it's a no budget. It's not a low budget movie. This is a no budget movie, and you can forgive some of the clunkier aspects of filmmaking because these are people learning how to make a movie, and it's the best kind of thing of you wanted to make a movie, you're limited, and it doesn't matter. You go and you make it anyways. No matter what, you don't worry so much that it doesn't sound perfect or look perfect. It's like you can't compare movies like this to, the big budget Hollywood movies. It's its own thing. And this movie fits in with that. And it's sad that it hasn't been part of the conversation with the Clerks, with the Reservoir Dogs, with the Sex Lies and Videotape, with even more lower budgeted movies than that. And like just all that.
Chameleon Street.
That's another one. Just like those. That era, that kind of like when Sundance meant something and actually stood up for the little guy, this movie fits in that so well. And I'm really glad that you and me are telling people about it. I feel like it fits into that world. It is that world. And it's the acting is fantastic. Like, yeah. The fact that they made this movie in 3 days is kind of incredible because it definitely has that improvisation feel to it, and it definitely has that kind of takes place in one night feel, but the performances, especially from everybody, really, I don't even want to just say just Leo, because everybody is very genuine and very good. And it was great in the interview to hear that this isn't just them being their young, wise-ass selves, it's them actually acting, showing that these are truly talented people. And this is them at the very beginning, which is really fun to kind of see these people that we now know who are great actors and have continued to be great. Like kind of at the beginning, they already kind of had that thing, that it thing. And it is sad that Jenny Lewis wasn't in more things as an actress, like beyond this, and the stuff she did as a little kid. Because she's really good. Like, that was kind of my takeaway, is that she's fantastic. And, like, I'm glad that she's given us this world of music, which is clearly her passion. But, man, like, it's fascinating to think, like, what would movies have been like if she kept doing them? Like, would she be on the same level as, like, a Maggie Gyllenhaal? Or, just those people that kind of made these fun indie movies.
Christina
and also
Ricci.
Christina
I
Ricci
could
for
see
sure.
a
Yeah,
career like that. for
Yeah,
her.
where you're kept taking chances and kept pushing yourself to be in these kind of challenging small movies.
She could be the next Sinatra. She could have been the next Sinatra, coming out with a film and an album every year from Jenny Lewis. Whew.
She's still young. She could come back to acting.
Well, you know what? Wouldn't it? Hey, wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be amazing if Don's Plum got rediscovered and other people started having this conversation?
Can you see somebody making like a small movie now, and she's the star, and everyone's like, "Oh shit, this is amazing! Like she's so good in it," and you're like, "Yeah, like she's been great. She was great 25 years ago in this other movie." Yeah.
Well, you know, my goal, as I was talking with Dale, I realized he certainly has his point of view, and I'm obviously very sympathetic to it for the most part. And at the same time, while he can sort of say, oh, yeah, they weren't the pussy posse and that's not really who they are, I'd love to hear the point of view of some of the women who were on the set, just their take on what it was like. Jenny Lewis is at the top of the list of the people I would love to talk to about this film. And I actually have this idea, as I was talking with Dale, about reaching out to, once this podcast is out, sending it to other people who were in the film or involved in the film in one way or another, and asking them if they would be willing to talk about it. And those can be bonus episodes. I've already spoken with Jerry Metters, who we spoke about in the interview with Dale, and he's already agreed to talk with me. So I'm definitely going to record that conversation. But I'd love to hear what Jenny Lewis has to say about this film. I'd love to hear what Bethany Ashton Wolf, who was one of the writers on the film, and she played the Hollywood executive who comes on to Kevin Connolly. Mm-hmm. I'd love to talk with Blake Sennett, who did the music, and get his take. Toledo Diamond is someone who I've been thinking it'd be interesting to reach out to get his take on this. Byron Thames would be great to talk to. Oh, and I hadn't even noticed that an old, very good friend of mine who was a roommate, a woman named Christina Karras, worked in the costume department. Maybe was the head of the costume department on this film, and I'm definitely going to be reaching out to her. So I just think it'd be great to build this oral history of the film and have it happen in this positive way, because I do feel like there's some pall or some fear about discussing this film, but at this point in the lives of these people, I think it's time.
Turn it positive.
Yeah.
And that's what I liked about the interview. Like all this kind of turned back into, oh, when me and my friends were young and we made this crazy movie. Like that's how this movie should be thought of, not as this weird, shelved, hidden, sad secret that we should be scared of. It should be something that's like we should open up and look at and go, what is this? And I think I really want to hear from Amber Benson, because like her whole, just, you know, that big scene of her leaving and throwing her sandal and like just being like kind of at the end of all those horrible insults in a movie and stuff. Like, what is that like, being at a table where everyone is just hating on you?
Boy, yeah.
I bet that's an interesting perspective that she has, and I've always really liked her. I've been a fan of hers since Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So,
yeah, I feel bad about not remembering her name during the interview. So apologies to Amber Benson. Yeah, that scene is. I used that scene as the clip for that starts off the show, and the moment when she breaks, when the girls turn on her, and that's the moment when she breaks, and it just crushes me every time, because she's sitting there and it's like all the guys are picking on her and she's going toe to toe, but when the girls turn on her, that's when she screams. And just that, I just know that feeling of feeling like, okay, at least someone has my back, and then the people you think are going to have your back don't. And what a moment. What a great moment.
Yeah.
And just on the off chance that the two people who sort of got set up for the most criticism in this podcast, the two most famous actors from the film, Tobey Macguire and Leonardo DiCaprio, happen to be listening to this, or people who are loyal to them are listening to this, all I want to say is that during this, I had the opportunity. It just came up synchronistically. I was hanging out with my girlfriend, and The Great Gatsby, the Baz Luhrmann Great Gatsby came on, and I had them in my head, and I watched that film, and they're fucking great in it. And that is a great, I don't care that's a really great Gatsby interpretation.
I haven't watched it. I want to see that real bad.
It's really, really good, and it made me just think, God damn, Tobey Maguire is I don't think I've ever seen him in anything that I didn't like him in. I'm a big fan of his as an actor. I'm not obviously a big fan of whatever happened the one night that made it so that we're still talking about the controversy around this film, but I also don't care. I don't hold any of that against him as an artist. I have a deep affinity for him as an actor, and obviously Leonardo DiCaprio is must, if he does something, he's on a run of greatness right now that we're just all looking forward to whatever the next thing he does, whenever the next thing he does comes out. So but yeah, Great Gatsby, great. I hope those two guys make more movies together, and I hope people see this film because they're great in it.
Yeah. And let's hope that maybe a actual legit Blu-ray can come out of this movie in this country someday, with like a commentary and a making of, and like a way for people to actually see it. Because who cares? By this point, it's so long ago.
Yeah,
just have the movie come out. Like it's like you're all old now. Like just let it be.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I hope we're opening up the space where this film can finally just have its moment. And I hope that Dale's book, that he finishes his book, and that it tells a story that he needs to tell. And whatever it is, I hope it just, let's just have a conversation about this, people. It's a great movie. It's a great movie. I don't want to say it's a great movie, because it's not. It's an important movie. It's an important movie. It's a first film that is so full of talent. It's like those early Brian De Palma films. They're not great, they're not great, but it's De Palma working with Robert De Niro in a spotty movie. You got to watch it.
That's a great comparison. I totally agree. Yeah.
What's that?
Like
what's it? Oh.
The Wedding Party. The Wedding Party. Not good, but important because it's young De Niro. Yeah, De Palma. It's just them kind of pretending to be Godard, but it's great because of seeing where it started, where it went.
Yeah. So I hope this is not the last time we're discussing this film. I think this is one of the films that we're gonna throw our arms around a little bit tighter,
like a Mad Dog time. Yeah, definitely in that pile.
Yeah. I guess one other thing, it just should. When I listen to it, there's definitely a sense, and I probably already hinted at this by saying I would love to hear from some of the women who were on the set, but I was definitely aware, listening to my conversation, that there were some times when women were referred to as chicks or things like that, that there's a part of me that as a listener, I'm like, okay, two guys talking about a pussy posse and using words like that could be really alienating. If you felt that way, I would love to hear your point of view. You can write to us at contact@theworldiswrongpodcast.com. If you didn't feel that way and you want to encourage, but I do feel like I want to open up a channel that we know that there are points of view that might see all of this differently, and I'm definitely aware of it, and we want to invite that. Like I said, it's all a conversation. So I can certainly see that some people might want to join that conversation, and you can by writing to us at contact@theworldiswrongpodcast.com. You can find all of our episodes at www.theworldiswrongpodcast.com. You can find us on our two social media platforms at The World Is Wrong Podcast on Instagram, where Brian is slamming and gramming with the best of them. And I am handling the Twitter account at World Is Wrong Pod. So that's where you can find us on the Twit land. And you can also find Brian hosting the Director's Wall podcast every, other month an episode comes out. No,
We're slow
pretty
on
much
that
every
one, I'm
month.
sorry.
It's Brian with our good friend AJ Gonzalez talking currently about the films of Francis Ford Coppola, with also occasional dips back into the land of M. Night Shyamalan when he has a new film out. And of course, I have Radio 8 Ball, the Radio 8 Ball show, which you hear the bumpers for on this, and so I'm not going to explain it other than to say it's fabulous and you should check it out. And coming up next week, what do we have, Brian? It's a film you picked. You should probably remember.
Ravenous.
Yeah.
A great movie. I'm very excited to share this movie with people. It is very, very, very funny, very, very gory, and just perfect for Wrongtober. A perfect pick.
Probably the most truly horror genre film in our exploration of horror films that people don't think of as horror films.
Yeah,
but there are other ways. There are plenty of other ways the world is wrong about that. This film, it's a fantastic.
Yeah,
picture.
We talk about the director. We go into this movie, so I'm excited for you all to hear it.
Yes. Fans of snowbound horror, get ready. If you like The Shining, you're gonna. It's not anything like The Shining, but there's snow. Okay, so I guess that's it. Thanks a lot to our guest, Dale Wheatley, for being a part of this. And thank you for listening and just sharing this love of movies with us. I feel like it's kind of a little support group, and we need this. We need this because, I mean, it's tough. This is true for everyone, but once you know the truth of it, I don't know if it makes it any easier once you realize that wherever you are, the world is wrong, and it happens to be wrong about you.
I think everybody's a hypocrite now.
I do too.
I know, but that's just like blatant.
I'm sorry, bro. You got me.
Hypocrisy.
Huh? What?
I get on your case a little much about being gay. I just think you should get it a little more out in the open.
What do you say we switch up?
I mean, he's not gay. He's just a fucking bisexual.
Switch up to the old fuck you game.
Wait, this
Fuck.
is wait. Okay, I'm sorry.
He wants to dance. Wants to dance.
Fuck you. Being a fucking neo-fascist Aryan bastard who wants everyone to be exactly like him, doesn't understand a thing I fucking do. In this moment as a fucking earthling on the planet, and I can suck cock or have my cock sucked by anybody. And you're a fucking 2-year-old.
Oh! Okay, looks like we're playing a new game, huh? Fuck you. Fuck you for smoking those ugly brown cigarettes, dude.
Fuck you for inviting me out on a date and not telling me that you're bisexual.
Ooh! Is it really behind?
Well, I don't know. I think it's more
thought maybe
acceptable
it would
for
turn
2
you on.
girls, maybe. As far
Fuck
as
that.
like the
Is it
age.
really?
What is
No, I phrased that wrong.
Yeah, fuck you for being narrow. That's just
No,
narrow.
it's not being narrow.
That's-
I just worry about having sex with a fellow who may have had
Don't
sex.
flatter
There are so
yourself,
many,
Toots.
no, but
Never said I
heterosexual
wanted
people
you.
having AIDS.
Just brought you to the
it's
table when I
much,
was my
much
punk
higher
friends.
than homosexual people.
What? Narcissus did the solemn countenance say to itself when it looked in the mirror? Said nothing. Laughed.
I feel like a cock right now, bro. Did I really upset you?
You didn't really upset me.
Because I just have a problem with the fact that you don't talk about it at all, bro.
You know what, bro? Fuck you for confronting him. Fuck you for being a cock tonight in general. Fuck you for fucking with this girl.
Dancing, handsome for dancing, handsome for dancing, handsome for.
Fuck you, bro, for being a poor guy who wears the same fucking shirt every week.
See, no, seriously. Wait a second. No, wait a second.
This goddamn
Wait a
shit
second.
right here,
Wait a-
when it doesn't make you as healthy as any of us, bro.
Bro, you know what you're
Fuck
doing?
you for
You know
still...
what you're doing, bro? You're fucking being way shallow,
You're
bro.
trying to
You're
be
talking
fucking
about my
sensitive all the
fucking my medicine, and you're making people cry and run out of restaurants, and it's like okay with you.
I'm sick of fucking the nice guy routine, bro.
Yeah, but you're being an
When
asshole.
I first met you, you were an asshole just like me, and all of a sudden you're the fucking vegetarian
So
spiritual
maybe
master of the
I've
universe.
grown.
nothing to do with growing, bro. I
Well-
think you're fucking being fake.
Dude,
That's what I-
two seconds
Cynical,
ago,
man.
2 seconds ago, you were talking about you feeling like a cock for doing that to him, and then you fucking jumped down his throat.
No, I just don't
Monogamous,
like, I have a problem. I think we should all confront shit, and that's what,
Yeah,
stand
but
together is about.
Did you
know
out
what I
him
mean?
in front of 3 girls that he doesn't know?
I don't give a fuck about you girls. I'm talking about my friends.
very
I love
nice.
you,
Yeah,
man.
but there's a way of confronting someone diplomatically, you know?
And you know that, dude. You know that. You take that up at the end of the night, bro.
Fuck you for having that voice, bro.
I like his voice.
Stupid New York voice of like some fucking mook on the street
Fuck
buying
you
a
for
hot
fucking
dog.
stifling my friend, man, because he
Fuck you for being
talks
a
different than you.
30-year-old fucking gay fag.
I'm just as old as you, man. You just haven't matured.
With crystal blue eyes, who probably has a vibrator at home and reads fucking Playgirl.
Fuck you for insulting vibrators.
Radio 8 Ball.
Andras here. When I'm not co-hosting the World is Wrong podcast, I'm hosting and producing the Radio 8 Ball podcast, where we answer questions by picking songs at random, like picking musical tarot cards. We've hosted musical divinations for people like John C. Reilly, Patricia Arquette, Tig Notaro, and Fred Armisen, and hosted over 200 songwriters, providing the randomly chosen answers from Inara George and Dan Byrne to Mose Allison and Alan Toussaint. That's Radio 8 Ball, all one word. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and download our app from the iTunes App Store.
Show.